History is a chronicle of great victories and mighty civilizations. But what if its most intriguing pages are written in invisible ink? Behind the glitter of triumphal arches and coronations lie secrets that still haunt the minds. These are tales of events that have left scars on the body of time, scars that never heal. Entire armies go missing, murders remain unanswered, and deaths shrouded in mystery. Get ready as we embark on a journey through 20 of the darkest and most inexplicable corners of the past. And our first story is about the fall of a titan, the death of Alexander the Great. Imagine a man who blazed a trail with sword and fire from the green valleys of Macedonia to the scorching shores of India. He crushed empires, the mere mention of which inspired terror in entire nations. At just 32 years old, he held the fate of the known world in his hands. But his demise came not in the roar of battle or from an enemy's blade, but in the oppressive silence of a luxurious palace in Babylon. At the very beginning of summer, in the 1st century BC, after returning from yet another grand campaign, the great commander began to feel ill. At first, it seemed like ordinary weakness, but the illness progressed rapidly. A slight ailment developed into a merciless fever that first sapped his strength and then his speech. Just a few days later, he was gone. And so, the great conqueror, considered by many a living god, was gone, leaving behind neither heir nor successor. He didn't even have time to say goodbye to his loyal generals. His sudden departure gave rise to one of the greatest mysteries, casting a shadow over all of world history. What really happened? Ancient chronicles paint a contradictory picture. Some chroniclers claimed the king's fatal illness struck after a grand feast where he drank an inordinate amount of wine. Others insisted it began after he was caught in a heavy rain. But many contemporaries of those events noted extremely strange details. Alexander's symptoms were completely unlike a common fever he suffered for over 10 days, visibly declining, yet retaining a clear mind. And most astonishingly, according to eyewitness accounts, his body remained undecayed even several days after his official death. This gave rise to a shocking conjecture. What if he was still alive, trapped within his own body in a deep coma? This became the first mystery of his death. But there's another, far more sinister theory. Murder. Murder planned and executed by his closest associates. Can they be blamed? The troops, exhausted by endless wars and campaigns, were barely maintaining their loyalty. The officers realized with horror that their indomitable ruler would not rest until he had conquered the entire world. The prime suspect in this dark affair was Antipater, the governor of Macedonia, whom Alexander himself had long suspected of treason. When the king demanded his report to Babylon, Antipater, as if sensing mortal danger, sent his son Cassander in his place. And what a coincidence! It was precisely after Cassander's arrival that the emperor's health began to decline sharply. Legend paints a grim picture. A poison brewed from rare plants was secretly delivered to the palace in a sealed mule's horn, the only vessel believed capable of preserving its deadly potency. However, this is merely the whisper of centuries, speculation that can neither be confirmed nor refuted. Ancient historians such as Plutarch and Arrian wrote about these events centuries later, relying on rumors that had long since become myths. Some of them rightly noted that any known poison would have killed the king much more quickly, meaning his demise was due to natural causes. The death of Alexander the Great was not just a personal tragedy, but a true mirror reflecting all the uncertainty and instability of the era. What truly felled the great conqueror? Poison, illness, betrayal, or simply the inexorable passage of time? The answer remains unknown. Only one thing is clear. With his passing, the world lost not just a ruler, but a living legend who remains unsolved to this day. There was a third force, which many believe to be the culprit of the tragedy, the wrath of the gods themselves. Having proclaimed himself the son of Zeus, Alexander demanded divine honors, which in the conservative Greek world was an unheard-of sacrilege. Perhaps this is why the myth of heavenly retribution for hubris has outlasted the memory of his great conquests. But the mysteries don't end there. The most mysterious developments began after his death. The body of the great king never returned to his native land. By order of his companions, his remains were embalmed, placed in a luxurious sarcophagus of pure gold, filled with honey for preservation, and shipped from Babylon. The funeral cortege was en route to Macedonia, but was daringly intercepted en route by Ptolemy, one of Alexander's closest associates. He took the priceless sarcophagus to Egypt and erected a grandiose mausoleum for his former master, known as Soma. For centuries, the tomb was a place of pilgrimage for pharaohs and emperors. But over time, in the chaos of changing eras, the trace of the great tomb faded into history. To this day, the greatest minds in archaeology grapple with the question, where lies the man who redrew the map of the ancient world? Every century gives rise to new hypotheses. Some researchers are convinced that the sarcophagus is hidden somewhere in the catacombs beneath modern-day Alexandria. Others believe it was secretly transported to Rome, where it was lost. And the boldest believe that the emperor's body remains incorruptible to this day, an eternal symbol of his invincible power. Now, let's travel to another era, to another great empire and its equally great mystery. Imagine the greatest military machine of antiquity, the Roman legions. Now imagine that one of them, an entire legion, simply vanished without a trace. The 9th Hispanic Legion, the very pride of Rome. Hardened in dozens of wars, it won victories in Gaul and Britain, subjugating tribes that froze with fear at its mere mention. And now it's gone. Vanished without a trace, no bodies of fallen soldiers, no abandoned weapons, no mass graves, not a single clue, only a deafening silence that has lasted for almost 2,000 years. The last official records of the 9th Legion date back to the early 2nd century A.D. At that time, Britain, only recently conquered by Rome, was a restless fringe of the empire. Far to the north, beyond the boundaries of civilized lands, lived the Picts, a fierce and warlike tribe who recognized no authority. Modern scholars, revisiting Alexander's death, have put forward more mundane theories. He could have fallen victim to malaria, which raged in the marshy regions of Mesopotamia, or he succumbed to typhus or acute pancreatitis, brought on by excessive drinking. There is even an exotic hypothesis about Guillain-Barré syndrome, a rare neurological disorder that causes complete paralysis while maintaining consciousness. This would perfectly explain why the king's body took so long to decompose. Perhaps he was buried alive, presumed dead a few days before his actual death. To pacify the northern tribes and assert Roman authority, the Ninth Legion was ordered to march from its camp in York. Nearly 5,000 battle-hardened soldiers, along with officers, standard bearers, a huge baggage train, and engineer units, were to set out on their final campaign north, into the mists of Scotland, to suppress yet another rebellion. However, after this campaign, the Legion was never heard of again. It was no longer listed in the official rosters of the Roman army. It was seemingly erased from history. For decades, historians have puzzled over this mystery. Some ancient authors claimed the Legion fell into a carefully planned ambush and was completely annihilated by the barbarians. Others wrote that it was transferred east to Mesopotamia, where it met its end in battles with the Parthians. But neither of these versions has ever been convincingly confirmed. Archaeologists have excavated hundreds of square kilometers, but have found nothing that could shed light on the Legion's fate, neither on British soil nor on the dusty roads of the eastern provinces. Dark legends still circulate along Britain's northern borders. Locals pass on tales of a ghostly Roman army wandering the hills in the night fog. They say one can sometimes hear the clanging of metal, the dull, measured footsteps of thousands of sandals, and the distant beating of drums. Some believe these are the souls of fallen legionaries, never to find peace. But what if there's a terrifying reality behind this myth? A battle so bloody and shameful that mighty Rome chose to forget it forever. In the ancient world, defeat was unforgivable, and the loss of an entire legion was considered an indelible shame. When Marcus Crassus's army was routed by the Parthians, the Senate ordered all mention of it expunged from all records. Perhaps the Ninth Legion suffered the same fate. It was easier for the authorities to erase the memory of him than to admit that their invincible soldiers were slaughtered in the wild northern lands where no one knew the gods of Rome. Moreover, by the time of its disappearance, discipline within the Legion appears to have been severely undermined. Veterans demanded promised lands, new recruits demanded leave, and commanders were plotting. The Legion had ceased to be the perfect fighting machine Julius Caesar had once so prided himself on. There's also a more elusive theory. The Legion may have mutinied, refused to obey orders, and then been exemplarily destroyed by its own forces, loyal to Rome, to conceal its shame and teach others a lesson. This would explain both the deathly silence of the sources and the complete absence of any traces. And yet, archaeology sometimes presents us with new mysteries. At the end of the 20th century, bricks bearing the stamp of the Ninth Legion, dating to a later period, were discovered in the Dutch city of Nijmegen. This may indicate that after the disaster in Britain, the surviving remnants of the Legion were reformed and sent to serve on the continent. Perhaps a small number of soldiers survived and continued serving under the old banner. But the main question remains, what happened to the thousands of others? Why did not a single camp, a tombstone, or a single burial remain? The debate continues to this day. Now let's travel to the North American coast, to Roanoke Island. This place, swept by the salty Atlantic winds amid swamps and pine forests, holds one of the most eerie secrets in American history. It was here, at the end of the 16th century, that the first English settlement in the New World vanished without a trace. More than 100 people, men, women, and children, vanished as if they had never existed. No bodies, No signs of a struggle, not the slightest hint of what happened to them. Only one clue remained, the mysterious word Croatoan, carved into a wooden palisade post. This word unsettles and baffles anyone who hears it, and it has done so for over 400 years. It all began with a dream of a new world. In 1587, English explorer John White, with the support of Sir Walter Raleigh, landed on the east coast of America. His goal was ambitious, to establish the first permanent English colony on this land. More than 100 settlers arrived with him, artisans, farmers, and entire families with children. Among them was his own daughter, Eleanor, who was expecting a child. This child was destined to go down in history as the first English person born on the American continent. The girl was named Virginia, and her birth was seen as a good omen, a symbol of a new era. People sincerely believed that a great future awaited them here on this land. However, it soon became clear that this future would be short-lived and brutal. The land proved inhospitable, harvests meager, and relations with local Native American tribes extremely tense. The colonists were plagued by intense heat, unknown diseases, and constant hunger. When John White realized his food supplies were running low, he made the difficult decision to return to England for help and supplies. He abandoned the colony, leaving behind his family, friends, and the faint hope of a quick return in a few months. No one could have imagined then that his return would be thwarted by raging storms and the war with the Spanish Armada. In ancient times, amber was considered more than just a beautiful stone. Imagine, people believed it to be a conductor, a bridge between the world of the living and the realm of spirits, frozen sunlight capable of preserving it forever. It's entirely possible that the legendary cross made of this material symbolized something more, a teaching in which faith and science merged, secret knowledge that a certain order desperately tried to preserve for posterity. But if so, why is the trace of this artifact soaked in blood and marked by a series of mysterious disappearances? History has left us with only fragments, a few mysterious episodes. Let's fast forward to the 10th century, to the French town of Larache. Here, during excavations, an ancient tomb is uncovered. Inside is a knight's sword and a fragment of stone strikingly similar to amber. Engraved on its surface are 4 mysterious symbols resembling spirals, symbols of the sun. However, the discovery doesn't remain public knowledge for long. Just a month later, the stone disappears from the museum without a trace. The thief is never found. A year passes, and the museum director dies under extremely strange circumstances. Personal notes are discovered in his home, in which he writes obsessively about a certain radiance that haunts his dreams. Centuries pass, and in the 20th century, an archaeologist from Warsaw claims to have discovered the relic. He was certain it was hidden in the old Templar commandery, somewhere on the Baltic coast. Around this time, the world witnessed an event that shook the foundations of civilization. May 5th, 1821, the remote island of St. Helena, lost in the cold waters of the Atlantic. Here, far from everyone, dies the man who, with the stroke of a pen, changed the borders of empires. In a cramped, damp room of the old Longwood house lies Napoleon Bonaparte. No longer Emperor of France, but an exile, a prisoner whose name until recently made every army in the world tremble. He spent the last years of his life under the watchful eye of British guards. Surrounded by only a few loyal officers and his doctor, he complained endlessly of an all-consuming weakness and a stabbing pain in his stomach. As his body began to cool, the world accepted the news as a logical conclusion. But rumors soon began to circulate. Dark whispers that the emperor had been killed not by illness, but by poison, administered slowly, with cold, calculated intent. The official version was that Napoleon had died of stomach cancer, a hereditary disease that had plagued his family. The doctors who performed the autopsy confirmed this. They found ulcers and extensive damage to the mucous membrane, characteristic of this diagnosis. Nevertheless, doubts hung in the air. One of the officers present noticed that the deceased's hair had taken on a strange greenish-gray tint, and his skin had become unnaturally dark. This was inconsistent with the symptoms of cancer. His personal physician, Francesco Antonacci, was forced to admit that what he saw could also be explained by arsenic poisoning. The first truly serious suspicions arose in the mid-19th century. Then, a lock of Napoleon's hair, preserved by his comrades as a relic, fell into the hands of chemists. Analysis revealed a shocking result. The hair contained an exorbitant concentration of arsenic. This meant only one thing. The poison had not entered the body all at once, but gradually, possibly over many years. But who could have done such a thing, and for what purpose? Some researchers pointed the finger at the British. Let's return to that story with the archaeologist. One of them wrote that in the dungeon of an old fortress, he personally observed amber fragments that resembled a melted cross. But just a week later, the laboratory where he stored these precious samples burned to the ground. After that, the scientist flatly refused to discuss his discovery and soon hastily left the country. Today, the Amber Cross remains nothing more than a myth that has absorbed everything humanity simultaneously fears and worships: faith, knowledge, and boundless power. Perhaps it truly is buried somewhere in the sands of ancient Prussia or hidden beneath the ruins of churches, or perhaps it never existed at all. This legend is but an echo of humanity's eternal striving for light, even in the darkest eras. And yet, when you enter ancient European cathedrals, where rays of sunlight filter through stained glass and scatter like golden dust, you can't help but think, this world knows much more about the Amber Cross than we do. It lives in every glimmer, every sparkle on an ancient stone, a reminder that secrets don't vanish without a trace. They simply change form, patiently awaiting the one who dares to touch them again and pay the price. The British government was terrified of Napoleon. They understood that even on this remote island, his name alone could inspire supporters and spark a new uprising. His correspondence was scrutinized, and his visits were strictly limited. However, to openly eliminate him would have provoked a colossal political scandal. Slow poisoning seemed the ideal solution, but not a single official document ever confirmed that London issued such an order. There's another, more personal theory. Napoleon trusted his entourage implicitly, but among his companions, there could easily have been those who were mortally tired of exile and dreamed of returning to France at any cost. Rumors point to his valet, Charles Tristan de Montholon, who often prepared strong drinks for the emperor. If poison was indeed mixed into wine or food, he could have become the perfect tool for a conspiracy, even without realizing it. Modern hair analysis, conducted in the 20th century using the latest technology, revealed that Napoleon's arsenic levels were roughly the same as those of most of his contemporaries. The poison was ubiquitous in that era. It was used in paints, wallpaper, clothing, and even cosmetics. And here's where an interesting detail emerges. The walls of the house on St. Helena were indeed covered with green wallpaper that contained arsenic compounds. In the humid tropical climate, this wallpaper could have released toxic fumes that slowly, day after day, poisoned his breath. Therefore, the emperor's death may not have been the result of malicious intent, but a tragic accident, the result of a toxic environment. And yet, too many oddities remain. Napoleon himself wrote in his diary that he felt as if he were being eaten away from the inside. He complained of a constant metallic taste in his mouth, an unbearable thirst, and his hair falling out. All these symptoms are classic signs of poisoning. Just before his death, he demanded an autopsy and instructed that the results be given to his son so that he would one day learn the truth. His last words, "I am dying before my time. I was killed by English oligarchs and their assassin," sound almost prophecy. After his death, Napoleon's body was embalmed. When his ashes were returned to France 20 years later, eyewitnesses were astonished. They were remarkably well preserved. For proponents of the poisoning theory, this became further irrefutable proof. Arsenic, as is well known, has preservative properties, preventing tissue decomposition. It was as if the emperor, killed by poison, had preserved his body incorruptible, lest oblivion itself erase his name from history. However, even if his death was natural, Napoleon's very history transformed it into a great myth. His defeat, exile, and agonizing illness became a symbol of the decline of greatness, the price of excessive ambition, and perhaps simply a reflection of the tragic human destiny. In his final letters, he showed no bitterness, only an all-consuming weariness and regret. He wrote that he had dreamed of seeing France happy, but now he saw before him only a boundless ocean separating him from his homeland. Today, standing beneath the dome of Les Invalides in Paris, where his sarcophagus rests, one is left with the persistent feeling that a silent question still hovers over this tomb. Who or what caused his death? Illness, betrayal, political will, or fate itself, weary of his invincible power? Perhaps the secret of Napoleon's passing lies not in poison, but in the simple fact that history abhors absolute power. He triumphed over nearly the entire continent, but, alas, he lost the battle with an invisible enemy, time. And his death became the final act of Europe's greatest drama. The man who considered himself the creator of a new era passed away in complete solitude, surrounded only by the wind, the sea, and the whisper of salty waves, as if the elements themselves were saying to him, "You were great, but even empires cannot overcome the laws of decay." It's the summer of 1943. At the height of World War II, military laboratories in the United States are working at full capacity, developing new types of weapons and defenses. Bomber squadrons are already thundering across the skies of Europe, and German U-boats are prowling the depths of the Atlantic, mercilessly sinking American convoys. It was during this tense time that, rumor has it, something occurred at a secret naval base in Philadelphia that would later be called one of the most terrifying and inexplicable mysteries of the 20th century. An experiment that was supposed to give the Navy an unprecedented advantage turned into a catastrophe beyond human comprehension. According to legend, the U.S. Navy conducted tests on the destroyer Eldridge. The ship was equipped with powerful electromagnetic field generators. The concept itself was ingenious in its audacity to create a kind of magnetic curtain around the vessel, making it completely invisible to enemy radar. This was based on principles developed by Albert Einstein himself, his unfinished unified field theory. The idea was to bend space-time around an object so that light and radio waves would bend around it. And so in October 1943, the destroyer Eldridge was moored at the Philadelphia shipyard. Witnesses, sailors from nearby ships, would later tell incredible stories. They saw a strange greenish fog thicken around the ship, and then it simply vanished into thin air. A few minutes later, they said, a bright light flashed in the air and the ship reappeared, this time several kilometers from its original position. When the smoke cleared, the deck was filled with indescribable horror. The Eldridge's crew, according to rumors, was in a state of profound shock. Some sailors were frozen in place as if petrified. Others screamed in excruciating pain, but the worst part was something else. Some of the crew were literally fused into the ship's metal structures, becoming one with it. The story of the Philadelphia experiment has become increasingly terrifying since 1954, when former sailor Carl Allen, known by the pseudonym Carlos Allende, sent a series of letters to the Navy. In them, he detailed what he allegedly saw, claiming to have witnessed a ship disappear, and that the experiment was an attempt to apply an electromagnetic shell based on the work of Einstein. Navy officials categorically denied conducting such tests. Documents confirmed that a destroyer named the Eldridge did indeed exist. However, according to them, it was never in Philadelphia at the time, but was serving in the Mediterranean. All stories about teleportation and invisibility were declared pure fiction. However, the rumors were unstoppable. Later, some supposedly surviving crew members claimed that during the experiment, imagine this scene, in the midst of a secret experiment, everything around suddenly dissolved into nothingness. The sky and sea merged into a single gray shroud, and the destroyer itself seemed to have fallen beyond the normal flow of time. Some of the crew vanished without a trace, as if erased from existence, and those lucky enough to return, returned with shattered minds. One theory, more down to earth, holds that the entire Philadelphia experiment story was merely a smokescreen. It concealed very real, but no less secret, developments related to new radar technologies and methods for protecting ships from enemy magnetic mines. In those years, the Navy did indeed actively use special coils that generated a powerful electromagnetic field around a ship's hull, effectively demagnetizing it. It's entirely possible that something went wrong during one of these tests. A blinding glare, showers of sparks, and a powerful jolt, felt even on shore, formed the basis of a chilling legend. Skeptics, however, offer an even simpler explanation for the entire incident. Powerful electromagnetic generators could have created a field so strong that it directly affected human perception. This could have caused severe dizziness bizarre optical illusions, and even short-term memory lapses in anyone nearby. Perhaps the ship's apparent disappearance was merely the result of a blinding flash and thick clouds of smoke, and the horror stories of sailors being fused into metal quickly arose from the general panic and inevitable exaggerations. But what about the testimony of those who swore they'd observed the destroyer's mysterious disappearance from a great distance? Gradually, this story acquired new, almost mystical details. In the 1960s, witnesses began to emerge claiming to have encountered sailors from the Eldridge decades later, the very same sailors who, by all accounts, should have perished on that fateful day. These men allegedly told incredible stories of lapses in time, of how, having fallen asleep in one place, they could wake up in a completely different place. Thus, the Philadelphia experiment became a grim symbol of how cutting-edge science, when taken too far, can devolve into something bordering on black magic. This legend has spawned dozens of books and films, and continues to spark heated debate. Even in serious scientific circles, the question is sometimes raised, what if in the 1940s, someone really did attempt to bend space itself? After all, if general relativity allows for the bending of time and light, why not try to use this knowledge to one's own ends? To date, official U.S. Navy records contain no evidence of such an experiment. But even here, something alarming remains. Some documents relating to the USS Eldridge's service were inexplicably destroyed or remain classified top secret, which only fuels historians' suspicions. On that very ship, which was transferred to Greece after the war, new crews constantly complained of strange and inexplicable phenomena. Compasses went crazy. Temperatures in compartments could fluctuate sharply, and many sailors experienced a persistent sense of déjà vu. So, what really happened? Perhaps it was all just a grand hoax, a myth born of the fears and tensions of wartime, or perhaps, on that distant night, the American military truly did glimpse where it was not yet time for humans to look, into the very fabric of the universe. If the ship truly disappeared, even for a moment, then where was it during that brief instant? Perhaps that's why today, when the Philadelphia experiment is discussed, scientists only smile enigmatically, but never offer a direct answer. After all, even the most incredible myths are sometimes born from experiences that cannot be put into words, from experiences that the human mind prefers to bury forever in its depths. Fast forward to August 1962. Hollywood, a city woven from spotlights and the flames of ambition, sparkled with its dazzling display. But behind this facade, in the shade of palm trees and expensive mansions, lurked a dull weariness and a chilling fear. It was here, in her Brentwood home, that Marilyn Monroe, an icon of a generation, a platinum symbol of an era, a woman worshipped by millions but seemingly understood by no one, was discovered lifeless. A glass of water sat on her bedside table, sleeping pills were carelessly scattered, and the telephone receiver hung limply on the floor. The official verdict was swift and unequivocal: probable suicide by barbiturate overdose. However, almost immediately, a completely different dark story began to emerge around her death. Rumors began to circulate about a mysterious diary that had vanished without a trace that very night, about the secrets it held, and about powerful forces capable of wiping out even a living legend. Marilyn was more than just a movie star. She embodied an entire era, a woman whose radiance dazzled. But behind that dazzling radiance hid an incredible fragility. She often wrote in her notebooks, short notes, poems, fragments of thoughts. These pages revealed far more about her than her closest friends, famous directors, or numerous lovers. According to those close to her, one of these notebooks, bound in red leather, was her personal diary. She recorded everything there, the contents of conversations, names, her most intimate impressions. Journalists later claimed that it may have contained detailed notes of her meetings with President John F. Kennedy and his brother, Attorney General Robert. On the night of her death, according to the police officers who were the first to arrive at the scene, this diary was lying on her bedside table. But when the official investigation began a few hours later, the notebook was no longer there. Her secretary later claimed to have seen a plainclothes man carrying a red notebook and several sealed envelopes out of the house. One of the officers even admitted to spotting a member of Robert Kennedy's inner circle in the bedroom. Witnesses claimed that Robert himself was indeed in Los Angeles that day, though officials vehemently denied this. The newspapers remained deathly silent, and all details of the case were quickly swallowed up by a thick fog of uncertainty. The investigation was incredibly rushed and riddled with contradictions. The autopsy results raised even more questions. The concentration of barbiturates in the actress's blood was many times higher than the lethal dose, yet almost no traces of the pills were found in her stomach. This clearly indicated that the fatal dose had not been ingested. The bedroom door was locked from the inside, yet there were no signs of forced entry. Curiously, the phone calls Monroe made shortly before her death were somehow not recorded by the phone company. It seemed as if someone had carefully and professionally edited the final hours of her life. In the following years, dozens of theories emerged about what happened. According to one, Marilyn was assassinated by intelligence agents who were terrified of information leaks. She allegedly knew too much about secret negotiations with Cuba, the White House's ties to the mafia, and dirty political intrigues. Some journalists claimed her diary contained direct quotes from candid conversations with the president. There was also another theory. Her death could have been a tragic accident, but someone powerful simply seized the opportunity to destroy incriminating evidence. Those who knew the actress closely said she changed dramatically in the weeks before her death. She abandoned filming and avoided journalists, yet she seemed surprisingly determined. In her diary, Marilyn allegedly left a final entry. "I feel like it's only just beginning." These words, later found in her drafts, didn't sound at all like the dying message of a despairing person. In the 1970s, former Los Angeles police investigator Norman Jeffries made a sensational confession. He claimed to have seen documents in the case file that mysteriously disappeared just before it was closed. Among them was an inventory of items seized from the crime scene, which clearly listed a notebook with a scarlet cover. This diary was never recovered. All traces were meticulously erased. Since then, the very phrase "burned diary" has become an ominous symbol of the entire story. According to one version, the notebook was indeed burned on orders from the Secret Service. According to another, it fell into the hands of a private collector and briefly resurfaced in the 1990s when an unknown person attempted to auction off Monroe's manuscripts in Switzerland. However, at the very last minute, the lots were withdrawn from the auction. Modern forensic experts who have examined the case materials unanimously declare evidence of forgery and tampering is obvious. Photographs taken at the scene strikingly contradict official reports and witness testimony. There are places on maps of our planet where the Siberian taiga stretches to the horizon, endless and wild. In these lands, winter reigns supreme for 9 months a year, and hundreds of kilometers of impenetrable forest lie before the nearest human habitation. Bears approach hunting lodges without fear, and rivers roar as if in eternal conversation with the piercing wind. It was in this lost world in the 1970s that geologists made an incredible discovery, accidentally stumbling upon a family whose existence no one had even suspected. These people had lived in complete isolation from civilization for over 40 years. They had no radio, no books, no contact with the outside world. They called themselves the Likovs and explained that they were the descendants of old believers who had fled persecution into the remote taiga back in the 1930s. Among them was Agafya, the youngest daughter, who was destined to become the last witness of this life outside of time. This incredible story began in the summer of 1978. A group of geologists, flying a helicopter over the upper reaches of the Abakan River in a remote part of Caucasia, spotted from above a tiny clearing containing a hut covered with birch bark. This place wasn't on any map. As the scientists approached the structure, thin, tanned men dressed in homespun burlap emerged. Their speech was archaic, replete with church Slavonic idioms, and their faces betrayed deep distrust. Thus, the world first learned of a family of hermits. The head of the family, Karp Lekov, had lived in the taiga for decades, completely convinced that the rest of humanity had long since perished. During Stalin's purges, he took his wife and children and retreated into the remote forests. Everything pointed to someone with immense power maintaining complete control. And so, decades later, this mystery not only persisted, but retained its dark allure. Marilyn became a myth forever, and her mysterious death became the apogee of that myth. She became the embodiment not only of beauty, but also of the incredible fragility of fame. Her dazzling smile, frozen on millions of vintage posters, serves as an eternal reminder that behind the brightest glitter, there always lies a bottomless loneliness. A Los Angeles archivist once told a story about finding a dusty envelope marked Personal MM in the basement of an old government building. Inside were several yellowed pages covered with fragments of phrases. They laugh when I'm silent. Everyone wants a piece of me, but no one wants all of me. Sometimes the voice on the phone sounds like someone else's. The authenticity of these recordings has never been proven, but perhaps that is how her real voice sounded, quiet as a whisper beneath the deafening crackle of flash bulbs. Marilyn Monroe's burnt diary is more than just a document no one has seen. It's a metaphor for a voice lost forever, forever irretrievable. Perhaps she truly did know too much. Or perhaps she simply shone too brightly for a world that fails to preserve its light. All that remains of her are photographs her eternal smile, and the ringing emptiness that surrounds her name. Let's travel back 66 million years to the very end of the age of dinosaurs. Before us lies a world that would seem alien and hostile to modern humans. Here, in the dense, steamy jungles of North America, the air is humid and heavy, filled with the hum of giant insects and the cries of unseen creatures. In this world, there is no room for weakness, and every day is a brutal struggle for the right to see the next dawn. And this world had its own undisputed king, whose very name instilled primal terror in all living things, Tyrannosaurus Rex. Rex. Imagine this creature. It's not just a lizard, it's a living mountain of muscle and fury, 12 meters long, as tall as a 2-story house, and weighing as much as a full-grown African elephant. Its skin, covered in tough scales, was capable of withstanding blows that would break the bones of any other predator. But its main weapon was its head, as huge as an industrial refrigerator and lined with rows of teeth, each the size of a banana and sharp as a dagger. The strength of its jaws was such that it could easily crush the bones of the largest herbivore as if they were dry twigs. There it is, standing at the edge of the forest, motionless as a statue carved from ancient stone. Its tiny, forward-facing eyes grant it binocular vision, a rare luxury among reptiles, allowing it to perfectly judge the distance to its prey. It inhales through its wide nostrils, and its brain, far more sensitive to odors than that of any modern bloodhound, analyzes millions of particles. It has smelled them. A herd of Edmontosaurus, giant duck-billed dinosaurs, grazes peacefully in a sunlit clearing, unaware that their final moments are already numbered. The Tyrannosaurus takes its time. It's a master of ambush. Its massive body, painted in dark, earthy tones, blends perfectly with the shadows of the giant ferns. At this moment, we see not just an animal, but a perfect killing machine, honed over millions of years of evolution. The tension builds with every second, and then it makes its move. The ground shakes as the multi-ton carcass breaks free in a monstrous lunge. The Edmontosaurus scatter in panic, their loud trumpeting cries echoing across the valley. But for one of them, it's too late. The predator catches up with the lagging giant. The mortal combat lasts only a few seconds. We hear the deafening crack of breaking bones, and the herbivore's enormous body collapses to the ground. Victory! The Tyrannosaurus lets out a roar that shakes the very foundations of this ancient world. It's not just a cry of triumph, it's a declaration. He rules here. But even such an apex predator wasn't easy. The Cretaceous world was full of dangers. He had to engage in deadly territorial battles with other tyrannosaurs, where one false step could cost him his life. He had to contend with armored ankylosaurs, Ankylosaurus, whose club-like tail could break his legs, or with 3-horned titans, Triceratops, who weren't about to be easy prey. Every hunt was a risk, every scar on his body told a story of a brutal battle for survival. The years passed. Our Tyrannosaurus became an old and wise king of his domain, but even kings don't live forever. One day, when the sky was covered with dark ashen clouds from distant volcanic eruptions, his hour came. Perhaps it was a wound sustained in his final battle, or simply the inexorable weight of time. He retreated into his final shadow, lay down on the damp earth, and his mighty heart stopped beating. The great king died. For millions of years, his remains lay in the earth, buried beneath layers of silt, sand, and volcanic ash. Time and pressure turned his bones to stone, preserving a shadow of his former glory for the distant future. And now, 66 million years later, in a completely different world, a paleontologist, combing the sun-baked wastes of Montana, notices a bone fragment protruding from a rock. Little does he know, it's the discovery of a lifetime. The painstaking work begins. Months of excavation under the scorching sun as the skeleton of a prehistoric giant is extracted centimeter by centimeter from its stone prison. For paleontologists, these are more than just bones. They are a chronicle written by nature itself. Every chipped tooth, every healed rib fracture is a chapter in its life. They try to understand how it lived, what it ate, how quickly it grew. Was it a solitary creature or did it live in family groups? Was it a swift hunter or a clumsy scavenger? This skeleton, once a living, breathing horror of the Cretaceous period, becomes a bridge between two worlds. A world where humans measure everything with numbers and technology, and one where life was defined by the roar of a predator and the beating of a primordial heart. The mystery of Tyrannosaurus Rex lies not only in its size and strength, it lies in the unimaginable span of time that separates us from it. Its petrified eyes conceal a silent knowledge of a world we will never see, of the laws of life that modern humans have long since lost. The mysteries of these ancient creatures are more than just puzzles for scientists. They are mirrors into which our own present gazes. Each such story speaks to the fact that life, no matter how powerful it seems, is incredibly fragile. We fear what we cannot explain, but this is precisely what drives us to continue searching, to continue digging, studying, recreating this lost world bit by bit. Perhaps this is why we seek answers where only echoes remain, in the dust of ancient rocks, in the depths of geological faults, and in the silent majesty of bones, which remind us that time has a memory far more powerful than any archive. And sometimes this memory tells a story of one creature who remained true to itself until the very end, even when only stars, stones, and the wind remained of its world. What really happened to the legendary Ninth Legion? This mystery still haunts us to this day. One theory takes us to the misty, wild lands of Scotland, where the legionaries, seasoned in hundreds of battles, could have met an inglorious end during one of the fierce uprisings of the local tribes. Another theory takes us far to the east, to the sun-baked battlefields of distant Armenia, or even the sands of Iran, where their famed war eagle could have fallen under the crushing blows of the enemy. There's a third, far more prosaic hypothesis. What if the surviving soldiers, exhausted by endless wars and weary of imperial ambitions, simply deserted? They may have abandoned their swords and shields to disappear among the indigenous peoples, becoming part of their blood, their culture, and their future. It's astonishing. But in ancient Scottish ballads, researchers sometimes detect echoes eerily reminiscent of the staccato rhythm of Roman military marches. And in places where there were never official garrisons, the earth occasionally unearths a solitary Roman coin. But, as 2,000 years ago, the final answer lies hidden behind the impenetrable veil of time. The Ninth Legion simply vanished, as if swallowed by history itself. For mighty Rome, this became an indelible shame, and for posterity, a profound mystery. His fate is a grim reminder that even the most invincible armies can one day vanish into oblivion, leaving behind only the whisper of the wind across the moors and legends of a darkness none dare enter again. Fast forward to 1590. When John White returned to the Roanoke colony he had founded, he was greeted by a deafening, deathly silence. The settlement he had left teeming with life now presented an eerie sight. The houses were abandoned, the defensive stockade dismantled, but that wasn't the worst part. There were no signs of battle, no traces of blood, no human remains. Absolutely nothing. The entire colony, all 117 souls, had simply vanished, as if its inhabitants had dissolved into the morning mist. Amid this silent desolation, White found a single clue, a word crudely carved with a knife into a wooden post. Croatoan. It was the name of a nearby island inhabited by a friendly tribe. On another tree, he found only the first three letters of the word, C-R-O, and the agreed-upon sign of alarm, a cross, was nowhere to be found. This could mean only one thing. The colonists left this place of their own free will. White intended to immediately set out for Croatoan to find his people. However, nature itself intervened. A sudden, violent storm made the sea voyage impossible. Devastated and depressed, he was forced to return to England, never again seeing those he had left behind on the edge of a new wild world. From that moment began one of the most captivating and unsolved mysteries in American history, the mystery of the disappearance of 117 settlers, including Virginia Dare, the first English child born on this land. Numerous theories have been put forward about the colonists' fate. The most initial and seemingly logical theory is that they did indeed move to Croatoan Island and, over time, assimilated with the local Indian tribe. Later, travelers and explorers repeatedly reported encounters with light-skinned Indians who spoke a bizarre mixture of English and their native language. Fragments of pottery and metal artifacts, clearly not indigenous to the culture, were found at their sites. However, direct and irrefutable evidence of such a fusion of the two peoples has never been found. Another, more sinister theory posits that the settlers fell victim to an attack by hostile tribes. But then a reasonable question arises: why were there absolutely no traces of battle left at the settlement site? Some scholars believe the colonists, in despair, attempted to move to the mainland in search of a better life. But the harsh journey proved too much for them. Hunger, disease, and merciless storms could have claimed their lives one by one. But hasn't a single skeleton or object been found throughout all this time that would point with absolute certainty to the tragic fate of the Roanoke residents? A century later, when English expeditions began exploring the coast, they repeatedly heard strange tales from the Indians. Legends of white spirits living somewhere far away, of people building stone houses and praying to their gods. Archaeologists excavating in North Carolina did indeed discover fragments of European artifacts, spearheads, broken pottery, and parts of muskets. All of these could have belonged to the vanished colonists, but not a single find provided a definitive answer. Over time, the true story became cloaked in myths and legends. Some claim the colony was destroyed by witches who inhabited the surrounding swamps. Others believe the island itself was cursed. In the 19th century, a theory even emerged of mass ritual suicide. Supposedly, the settlers, seeing no other option, chose death, over a long and painful agony. In the 20th century, conspiracy theorists went even further, linking Roanoke's disappearance to magnetic anomalies, time rifts, and even the intervention of extraterrestrial civilizations. Among all these hypotheses, there is one, the most humane and perhaps the most realistic. This version holds that the Roanoke settlers simply ceased to be English. Cut off from their homeland, forgotten and abandoned to their fate, they may have adopted the culture of the local tribes. They learned their language, married their women, learned to build new dwellings, and over time changed their faith and way of life. Their descendants were absorbed into the new nation long before history had time to record their disappearance. Modern genetic research continues. Scientists are studying the DNA of descendants of Native American tribes living in the southern United States and finding European markers in their genes. However, proving that these are traces of the very same Roanoke colonists remains elusive. The site of their settlement is now an archaeological park where every inch of the land has been studied under a microscope. And yet, the key answer remains elusive. The Roanoke colony became more than just a historical mystery for America. It's a true parable of oblivion, of people abandoned to the wild world who vanished without a cry, without a trace, without a farewell. Their shadows live on in old chronicles and chilling legends, and a single word, Croatoan, has become an eternal symbol of how quickly human dreams can crumble to dust when left alone on the edge of an unknown world. And as the ocean roars off the Carolina coast and fog looms over the pine groves, it seems the island still holds their voices. The voices of those who believed they were building a new homeland, but instead became part of its great mystery, the mystery of the Iron Mask. We are transported to the reign of Louis XIV, the Sun King, when France shone with the dazzling luxury of its palaces, yet trembled under the cruelty of its laws. In the shadow of the gloomy Bastille, a man languished for decades, unknown even to those who guarded him. His face was forever hidden behind an iron mask, and his true name was not spoken aloud. No one knew who he was, a dangerous criminal, a traitor, a disgraced royal relative, or a prisoner who bore a secret capable of destroying the throne. Only one fact was certain. This man spent more than 30 years in captivity, until death itself freed him from his chains, and history from the necessity of silence. It all began at the end of the 17th century, when the absolute power of Louis XIV reached its apogee. His France was a kingdom of splendor and pervasive fear, where any secret connected to the royal family could cost lives. It was then that the first trace of the mysterious prisoner appeared in official documents. The prisoner was transferred to Pignerol prison in the south of the country. He was assigned a captain of the guard, a man named Benigne d'Auvergne de Saint-Mars, known for his impeccable loyalty to the crown. He was charged not only with guarding the prisoner, but also with protecting his identity at any cost, even at the risk of his own death. In official documents, the prisoner appears under the name Monsieur Marchioli, clearly a fictitious one. Wherever he was held, he was always placed in a separate, isolated cell, and no one was allowed to see his face. He was permitted to communicate only with the guard commander, who conducted conversations through a closed door. Later, the prisoner was transferred from one fortress to another, first to Ile Sainte-Marguerite, and then to the famous Bastille, where he died in 1703. When the mysterious prisoner died, he was buried under the same name, Marchioli, and all his personal belongings were immediately burned. Thus was born one of the most enduring and disturbing mysteries in European history. So, who was the man in the Iron Mask? As early as the 18th century, the philosopher Voltaire mentioned him as the king's brother. Later, the great Alexandre Dumas transformed this version into a gripping legend about Louis XIV's twin, hidden from the world so he couldn't claim the throne and threaten the ruling dynasty. This story seemed too dramatic to be fiction. However, documents from the era point to other possibilities. There are several hypotheses. The first is political. Some historians are convinced that the masked figure was Count Ercole Mattioli, an Italian diplomat who betrayed France during secret negotiations. For this treason, he was captured and imprisoned without trial. However, archival evidence indicates that the real Mattioli died long before the prisoner appeared in the Bastille. Another theory points to a certain Eustache d'Auger, a servant of the all-powerful Cardinal Mazarin, who was accused of treason. This man was famous for his loquacity and may have known too many palace secrets. Perhaps the mask was not iron, but velvet, and was worn only during the transport to prevent identification. But this theory also fails to explain why d'Auger's case was shrouded in such unprecedented secrecy. The darkest and at the same time most intriguing hypothesis is dynastic. According to it, the masked man was indeed Louis XIV's brother, not a twin, but the product of an illicit affair with his mother, Queen Anne of Austria. If the truth were revealed, it could have led to the collapse of the entire Bourbon dynasty. Therefore, the child was hidden from birth and then turned into a living ghost, a prisoner whose existence could not be confirmed with a single word. Contemporaries recalled that the captive spoke with refined politeness, knew Latin, and behaved as if accustomed to royal quarters from childhood. Even his jailers sensed that before them was a man of noble birth. In the early 18th century, when the lifeless body of a mysterious prisoner was carried out of his cell, the commandant of the Bastille ordered the destruction of everything that could identify him: clothing, furniture, writing materials. Everything was consumed by the fire of oblivion. In the prison registry, instead of a name, only meaningless letters appeared, as if death itself feared to reveal this secret. 3 centuries passed, but the mystery remained. Scholars rummaged through the Vatican archives, corresponded with the descendants of French aristocrats, and analyzed the reports of prison commandants. However, all efforts proved futile. Every lead led to a dead end. Some researchers speculate that the Iron Mask itself is a later myth. The legend of the metal face may have arisen over time as a symbol of absolute submission and the complete loss of human form. The mask may have been leather or velvet, but in the popular imagination, it became a symbol of a cold, immobile, and impassive prisoner. Historians continue to debate, but none of the theories answer the main question: why were measures of secrecy imposed on this particular prisoner that were completely disproportionate to his potential status? Even the most dangerous state criminals weren't kept in such isolation, so completely isolated. Some researchers are convinced that the identity of this mysterious prisoner was inextricably linked to the king himself. Perhaps this was his illegitimate descendant, or even more dangerously, a witness to some terrible palace crime. But what if the truth was far more prosaic and therefore even more terrifying? The masked man could have been a simple prisoner of humble origins, becoming a living symbol of absolute power, which thus hid its own deepest fears. In an era when a single rumor, a single piece of gossip, could crush an entire empire, any secret became a formidable weapon, and the darker and more impenetrable it was, the longer its life was destined. Today, not a trace remains of the walls of the Bastille, nor of the very cell where this unfortunate man was held for decades. But here's the paradox. The name of the man in the iron mask has survived the centuries, becoming a true parable of how skillfully history guards its darkest secrets. His fate is a chilling reminder of a time when a man could easily be deprived of his face, and his forced silence resonated louder than any confessions or manifestos. And until a single piece of real evidence is found, this secret will live on, palpable as someone's breath behind a blank wall, the breath of the one whose face has forever become a symbol of the immutable truth. State truth always has a mask. Let's travel to another era, another empire. Here, on the night of July 16, 1918, in the damp and stuffy basement of the Ipatiev house in Yekaterinburg, shots rang out. These shots brought a bloody end to the 400-year saga of the Russian monarchy. Emperor Nicholas II, his wife Alexandra Feodorovna, their daughters, the Grand Duchesses Olga, Tatiana, Maria, and Anastasia, and the heir to the throne, Tsarevich Alexei, were officially declared dead. That was the blunt report of the Bolshevik government. However, within a few years, rumors began to circulate around the world, discussing something completely unbelievable. What if someone from the royal family had actually survived that carnage and managed to escape? And it was the name of the youngest daughter, Anastasia, that formed the basis of a legend that gave rise to one of the most persistent and disturbing mysteries of the entire 20th century. Following the revolutionary upheavals, Russia plunged into chaos. Historical documents were burned by the ton, witnesses disappeared without a trace, and the bodies of the executed family were never found. In the first months after that terrible night, conflicting reports began to emerge from the torn country. Some reports claimed that the entire royal family had been completely exterminated. Others insisted that only Nicholas and his son Alexei had been executed, with the women secretly taken to safety. Rumors persisted among White Army officers fighting in the Urals that at least one of the Grand Duchesses had somehow miraculously escaped execution. And although no documentary evidence existed to support this theory, it took on a life of its own. These rumors gained new momentum several years after the revolution. Suddenly, women began appearing in Poland, then Czechoslovakia and Germany, each claiming to be the surviving Grand Duchess. But Anna Anderson was destined to become the most famous of them. She was discovered in the 1920s in a Berlin asylum where she had been taken after a desperate attempt to take her own life. Her aristocratic manner, distinctive accent, astonishing knowledge of court customs, and even the scars that covered her body, all seemed surprisingly convincing. Anderson told the world her story. She had miraculously survived a firing squad, hidden by her sister's body, and had been rescued by a guard, after which she was forced to hide for many years under assumed names. For thousands of people tormented by the horrors of the Revolution and Civil War, her story became a true ray of hope. After all, if Anastasia really did survive, it means the past has not been erased, and there is still a chance to get something back. For decades, Anna Anderson lived at the epicenter of endless legal proceedings, newspaper scandals, and heated debates. Some fervently believed her story, while others branded her a skilled adventurer. The surviving Romanov relatives categorically refused to acknowledge her. However, many members of the old aristocracy and former courtiers swore they saw in her traits they had known since childhood. She knew such intimate details that seemed impossible to invent. The exact layout of the rooms in Tsarskoye Selo, the names of pets, and even the special terms used among the emperor's children. However, her opponents reasonably countered that all this information could have been gleaned from the stories and memoirs of other émigrés. The second half of the 20th century added new mysteries to the fire. For many years, Soviet archives kept a report by investigator Sokolov, one of the first to investigate the murder of the royal family, classified as secret. His materials, which were eventually smuggled abroad, contained numerous inconsistencies and contradictions. The report mentioned traces of blood and bone fragments discovered in the shaft at Ganina Yama. However, it contained no direct evidence that all the bodies had been completely destroyed. Moreover, the number of remains found there was completely inconsistent with the number of victims, leading to a bold hypothesis. Perhaps some family members had been secretly removed from the Apatiev house before the execution. And then, in 1991, immediately after the collapse of the Soviet Union, a group of enthusiastic archaeologists made a startling discovery. Near Yekaterinburg, they discovered a secret burial site. A shallow pit held the remains of 9 people. Judging by the age of the skeletons and the first genetic studies, these were indeed the Romanovs and their retinue. But the sensation lay elsewhere. 2 bodies were missing. These were the remains of Tsarevich Alexei and one of his sisters, presumably Maria, or the aforementioned Anastasia. This discovery seemed to directly confirm the old legend. Despite numerous studies conducted back in the 2000s, scientists continued to debate the identity. Some DNA analysis results indicated an exact match with the genotype of living relatives of the imperial family, but other tests left too many unanswered questions. A myth that seemed to be fading has gained a second wind. Historians have tried again and again to reconstruct that horrific night. After all, when the Chekists burst into the house, there were several people there who weren't security guards. A doctor, servants, a cook, a footman. In the pitch-black chaos of the gunfire, someone really could have survived. Bullets ricocheted off the diamonds secretly sewn into the Grand Duchess's corsets. Suddenly, the lights went out, and piercing screams drowned out the roar of gunfire. If one of the girls simply fainted from terror, she could easily have been mistaken for dead. And when the bodies were rushed out of the city, perhaps a sympathizer risked their own life to save her. It sounds like the plot of an adventure novel, but it is precisely from such unlikely coincidences that great legends are born. Some researchers point to the political aspect of this story. Immediately after the Tsar's death, the Bolsheviks desperately tried to control all rumors. In the first months, reports about the fate of the royal family were deliberately contradictory. Some newspapers reported that the Tsarina and her children were alive and safe, while others reported their execution. Perhaps this was a deliberate disinformation campaign designed to confuse the White Guards and monarchists. But then a reasonable question arises. Why did the Soviet government carefully conceal the exact burial location for so long? Why were reports destroyed and key witnesses removed from the case? Today, the overwhelming majority of scholars consider this matter finally closed. All members of the Romanov family perished in Yekaterinburg. However, the public consciousness is reluctant to accept this dry verdict. The legend of Anastasia's survival lives on in books, films, and theater productions, as if humanity itself refuses to accept this irrevocable truth. The story of this family has become a symbol of an entire vanished world, an empire that collapsed not only under a hail of bullets, but also under the weight of its own illusions. There's a deeper, more philosophical side to this mystery. Perhaps the legend of Anastasia's survival is a way of apologizing for the past itself. People instinctively seek to find even the tiniest ray of hope in any catastrophe. They want to believe that somewhere out there in the darkness, at least one witness remains alive, able to carry the memory of what happened through the years. This is what happened here. The myth of the rescued princess became a symbol of the belief that not only the bloodshed, but also the life itself of the great empire survived. In 2008, when two more bodies were found near the main burial site, an examination confirmed them, Alexei and Maria. This scientific proof seemed destined to end all controversy. However, the legend lives on. The execution site continues to attract people to this day, who leave flowers and light candles there, as if hoping that death could not have been so prosaic and silent. The mystery of the Romanov substitution is not simply a question of who survived and who died. It is a mirror of an entire era, where real history and folk myth are so closely intertwined that one can no longer exist without the other. Now let's fast forward even further to the 14th century. France, a land of valiant knights and powerful monasteries, stood on the brink of disaster. King Philip IV, nicknamed the Fair, reigned at the time. This man, possessed of an unbending iron will and a cold, calculating mind, did incredible things to strengthen his country's political power. However, it was his decisions that set in motion a chain of events that many would later call the true curse of the Capetian dynasty. The conflict between the king and the Knights Templar, the most powerful and wealthy knightly order in Europe, was the first step toward this abyss. Their immense wealth and enormous influence aroused the burning envy of even monarchs. The Templars were founded in the 12th century with the noble goal of protecting pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. But over time, they evolved into not only a formidable military force, but also a colossal financial power. They owned castles, vast lands, entire fleets of ships, and treasuries bursting with gold. Kings themselves borrowed money from them, and popes entrusted them with the safekeeping of their treasuries. And when Philip himself was mired in debt after a series of devastating wars, He realized that the only way to free himself from his financial obligations was to completely destroy his creditors. In the 1307, by personal order of the king, all the Templars in France were arrested in one day. They were accused of heresy, witchcraft, devil worship, and a host of other unimaginable crimes against the faith. Interrogations were conducted under the most brutal torture. The Grand Master of the Order, Jacques de Molay, and his closest associates were forced to confess to everything the inquisitors demanded of them. Later, at the trial, they recanted their testimony, claiming that everything they had said had been beaten out of them by inhuman pain, but the king had no intention of listening to their defenses. In March 1314, Jacques de Molay and several of his brothers in the order were burned at the stake on the Ile de la Cité, directly opposite the windows of the royal palace. According to legend, as the flames engulfed his body, the master raised his eyes to heaven and uttered words that have become legendary. Pope Clement, King Philip, before a year has passed, I will summon you to the judgment of God, and may a curse fall upon your line to the 13th generation. This terrible curse began to come true almost immediately. Pope Clement V died just a month after the master's execution. Philip himself, while hunting, fell from his horse and died by the end of that year. His sudden death shocked the entire country, but that was only the beginning. Following him, one after another, all of his sons passed away. Louis VI, the Quarrelsome, Philip the Tall, and Charles Béartre the Fair. All three reigned briefly and departed this world without leaving male heirs. Thus ended the direct line of the Capetian dynasty, which had ruled France for 3 centuries. Perhaps this is why the question of Anastasia's survival will forever remain unanswered. Not because there is no answer, but because humanity desperately needs such mysteries which remind us of the fragility of power and the power of legend. History seems to have reached an end, but this is only an illusion. In the darkest recesses of the past, a spark sometimes smolders, ready to ignite a new flame. Such a shadow hung over the Capetian royal house, the shadow of an ancient curse. And following these fateful events, a wave of chaos engulfed the kingdom. The land, which only yesterday seemed unshakable, collapsed into an abyss of civil strife and bloodshed, an era that future chroniclers would call the 100 Years' War. And in every creaking cart, in every ringing alarm, commoners and nobles alike heard the same ominous whisper: this is retribution, heavenly punishment for the innocent blood of the Knights Templar. The chronicles of those dark years are replete with references to mysterious illnesses, sudden deaths, and a series of misfortunes that, like an evil fate, haunted every heir of Philip the Fair. Even the widowed wives of his sons found themselves embroiled in sordid scandals and court intrigues that went down in history as the affair of the Tower of Nesle. 2 young princesses were caught in adultery. Their lovers were subjected to the most brutal executions, and an indelible stain of shame fell upon their families. It seemed as if fate itself had begun to dispense justice, fulfilling the dying prophecy of the Grand Master, who was consumed by the flames of the pyre. With each passing decade, this dark legend only gained strength. When the new Valois dynasty, a collateral branch of the Capetians, ascended the French throne, they too could not escape their evil fate. The kingdom was rocked by popular uprisings, epidemics raged, famine ravaged the lands, and wars continued. And every time a new disaster befell the country, chroniclers recalled the terrible curse. Imagine, even 300 years after that horrific execution, many Frenchmen continued to believe that the invisible ghost of the order still haunted the lands of France, demanding retribution. Interestingly, archival records have survived to this day, attesting to the panic that gripped King Philip's entourage after the massacre. One of his most trusted advisors soon fell ill with an unknown illness and died in terrible agony, claiming to his last breath that he was haunted by visions of roaring flames and the distinct voice of Jacques de Molay, calling him to trial. Even those who merely witnessed the trial died under strange and terrifying circumstances. Of course, some historians offer a more rational explanation for these events, claiming that the string of deaths in the royal family was nothing more than a tragic accident. In that harsh era, people often died young, and the protracted 100 Years' War was caused by complex political and dynastic disputes, not by mystical retribution. And yet, the facts are stubborn. Inexorable fate, like an invisible executioner, one by one took away all those involved in the destruction of the Templars. The Knights Templar, devoted to fire and sword, forever remained in popular memory as great martyrs. Their emblem, a scarlet cross on a white cloak, became a symbol of hidden mystery and inevitable vengeance. For centuries, the order grew surrounded by myths, claiming that a small group of knights managed to survive and escape, taking with them not only countless treasures, but also secret knowledge and the greatest Christian relics, including the legendary Holy Grail. These surviving warriors took with them not only riches, but also a sacred oath to avenge their executioners. The Capetian curse became a convenient explanation for all subsequent catastrophes in French history. When the guillotine blade prepared to end the life of Louis XV in 1793, a huge crowd in the square whispered the words of Jacques de Molay. It seemed that the ancient punishment centuries later had finally closed its bloody circle. Even Napoleon, the new ruler of Europe, could not escape the ominous parallels. His empire collapsed as swiftly as that of Philippe, blinded by his thirst for power and his belief in his own invulnerability. Today, scholars see this legend as a powerful symbol of its era, a time when human life was utterly defined by faith and fear. This curse became not just part of religious folklore, but also a dire political lesson. Any power built on betrayal and bloodshed is ultimately doomed. The story of the Capetian dynasty serves as an eternal reminder that rulers who destroy their former allies for short-term gain will sooner or later pay the price. And it matters not who will be the instrument of retribution, the heavens, a rebellious people, or inexorable history itself. The curse of Jacques de Molay is the very conscience of Europe, a warning bell reminding us that every crime will one day have to be paid for. And when modern tourists wander the stone floors of Notre Dame Cathedral, they see faded symbols on the ancient slabs and dismiss them as mere remnants of bygone centuries. But those who can sense the breath of history are certain that these are nothing other than the imprints of the very fire in which the Grand Master of the Templars uttered his final, eternal prophecy. Let us now move to a completely different era, where curses were replaced by a belief in the boundless potential of man. In the 1930s, humanity turned its gaze to the sky, which had become a new arena for heroes, and among them, one star shone Amelia Earhart. Her name thundered across America. Her captivating smile stared from the covers of glossy magazines, and her daring flights inspired millions of women around the world. She didn't just pilot an airplane, she broke stereotypes and shattered boundaries that only yesterday seemed immutable. As the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean and the holder of a litany of aviation records, Amelia became a living symbol of courage and freedom. And so her mysterious disappearance became a true national mystery, intertwining glory, primal fear, and chilling uncertainty. In the early summer of 1937, Amelia challenged her greatest dream, a flight that would be the pinnacle of her incredible career, a round-the-world trip. Together with her experienced navigator Fred Noonan, she lifted her trusty Lockheed Electra into the air, a twin-engine plane with its silver skin glinting in the sun. It looked like a dream, ready to fly around the world. By then, thousands upon thousands of kilometers lay behind them: South America, Africa, India, and distant Indonesia. In early July, they faced the final, most treacherous leg of the journey, a flight from Ley Island in New Guinea to a tiny point in the Pacific Ocean, Howland Island. It was a test of human and technological capabilities, more than 3,000 kilometers over a boundless aquatic desert. July 2nd began serenely. The radio operators dutifully received Amelia's reports on their altitude and chosen course. But the closer the plane got to its target, the worse the weather became. A thick blanket of clouds completely obscured the horizon, and the crackling static in their headphones grew louder. It seemed as if the elements themselves had turned against the brave pilots. Their aircraft lacked modern navigation systems like radar. Their only reference point were radio signals from the USS Itasca, stationed off the coast of Howland Island. In the final minutes of radio communication, the atmosphere on the airwaves grew tense. Amelia's voice, usually so calm and confident, sounded tinged with anxiety. She reported that she couldn't find the island and that the fuel in the tanks was running low. Then came her final, now legendary sentence: "We're moving along line 157 to 337. Immediately after that, the airwaves went silent forever. Dozens of aircraft and U.S. Navy ships were dispatched to search for the missing plane. The largest search and rescue operation of its time unfolded. Week after week, rescuers combed the ocean square after square, but to no avail. Not a single piece of debris, not a single oil slick on the water, not a trace of the crew. The silver Lockheed seemed to have simply vanished into thin air. This news came as a genuine shock to all of America, where Amelia was not just a celebrity, but a national treasure. President Franklin Roosevelt personally ordered the search to continue, and her husband, publisher George Putnam, continued to finance private expeditions for months in the hopes of finding at least some clue. But all was in vain. Thus began one of the greatest mysteries of the 20th century. A myriad of theories have emerged about what actually happened. The simplest and most obvious is disaster. The plane ran out of fuel. Earhart and Noonan were unable to spot the tiny island in the ocean and crashed into the water. But there's a problem. Even decades later, when the ocean floor was explored using satellites and deep-sea submersibles, the crash site has never been found. Other theories were far more sinister. After the end of World War II, a hypothesis arose that Amelia was not just a daring pilot, but a secret agent on a reconnaissance mission. At the time, the United States was watching with great concern as Japan built up its military power in the Pacific. Perhaps her around-the-world flight was merely a cover for aerial photography of Japanese military bases. According to this theory, her plane was shot down or forced to land on one of the Marshall Islands. The crew was captured and perished in prison. This theory was reinforced by stories from locals who allegedly saw a female pilot with short hair and fair skin in a Japanese camp. And although official U.S. intelligence has always denied these rumors, their echoes continue to this day. There's also a more hopeful theory, one of rescue. Its proponents believe Earhart managed to make an emergency landing on an uninhabited atoll in the Kiribati archipelago, but she and her navigator later died of hunger and thirst. In the 2000s, an archaeological expedition did indeed find scraps of aluminum siding and the remains of women's shoes manufactured in the 1930s on Nikumaroro Island. However, there's still no definitive proof that these finds are connected specifically to Amelia Earhart's plane. Some historians believe the 1930s era itself was the cause of this tragedy. Technological progress was racing forward at breakneck speed, outpacing human capabilities. Transoceanic flights were deadly, radio communications were frequently interrupted, and navigation was more like a lottery. And yet, the disappearance of a woman who had become an icon of courage left America deeply traumatized. How could the nation come to terms with the idea that its heroine had simply vanished into the unknown waves? Her entire life was the stuff of legend. She grew up the daughter of a successful lawyer, but from childhood, it wasn't balls that drew her, but the clouds. At 24, after taking her first flight, she realized she was truly called to fly. When she crossed the Atlantic as a passenger in 1928, the whole world knew her name. But fame wasn't enough for her. She needed risk, a true challenge. And so, she took to the skies again, this time alone, to become the first woman to fly solo across the ocean. Newspapers called her the Queen of the Air, and millions of women around the world saw her as living proof that all boundaries exist only in our imaginations. Her personal diaries, discovered after her death, are striking in their icy calm. There's not a trace of fear, not the slightest doubt. Only dry notes about the strength of the wind, the position of the stars, the steady hum of the engine. She wrote that high in the sky, she felt not loneliness, but absolute, intoxicating freedom. Perhaps that's why her story touches people's hearts so deeply to this day. She passed away undefeated. The search for traces of Amelia Earhart continues. Modern expeditions are plowing the seabed near Nikumaroro Island using drones and deep-sea robots. In 2020, researchers announced they had discovered an object at great depth, resembling a Lockheed Electra. But to date, no one has been able to confirm that it is indeed her plane. Each new expedition only reminds us that the truth remains securely hidden beneath the waves and time. The mystery of Amelia Earhart's disappearance is more than just an unsolved case. It's a powerful symbol. She vanished into the very sky she loved so deeply, leaving behind only an endless horizon full of questions. Some see her fate as a tragedy. Others see it as the ultimate expression of freedom, pushed to its absolute limits. Perhaps she simply became part of what she loved most in the world, the ocean and the wind. Imagine a legend shrouded in the mists of time, a story of the greatest journeys which never end with a return home, but extend into eternity, to where the sky merges with the sea and where heroes attain immortality. The mystery of the Amber Room became such a legend, it was dubbed the eighth wonder of the world, a hall crafted not from cold marble or garish gold, but from solar stone, warm as the very breath of the planet. The Amber Room was more than just a masterpiece of art. It became a tangible symbol of boundless splendor and unshakable power, a powerful amulet of a bygone era. Its panels shimmered with every shade of light, from pale gold to thick viscous honey. A soft, otherworldly glow emanated from within, as if nature itself had forever trapped a ray of sunlight in amber. But in the fiery whirlwind of World War II, this wonder vanished without a trace, as if it had dissolved into thin air. From that moment on, the mystery of the Amber Room became one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the century. The story of its creation dates back to the early 18th century, when the Prussian King Frederick I ordered the creation of something unprecedented. The finest minds and hands of the time, masters whose names have gone down in history, such as Gottfried Wolfram, Andreas Schlüter, and Gottfried Thurau, set to work. The work lasted for many years. Panels of precious Baltic amber, the finest inlays of pure gold, sparkling mirrors, filigree carvings, and masterful painting, all of this was woven into a single perfect harmony, where human art approached divine design. However, the fate of this creation proved far more twisted and tragic than its creators could have imagined. Several decades later, as a sign of strengthening their friendship and alliance, the Prussian king presented the Amber Room as a gift to the Russian Tsar Peter the Great. This grand diplomatic gesture marked the beginning of a new grandiose stage in its life. The room was carefully transported to St. Petersburg, where Italian artisans at the imperial court reassembled it, first in the Winter Palace and later in Tsarskoye Selo. It was here, within the majestic walls of the Catherine Palace, that it acquired its final, celebrated appearance. The 10-meter-long hall was completely covered in amber panels, decorated with carved ornaments, Florentine mosaics, and dazzling gilding. In the soft, flickering light of thousands of candles, it resembled a living, pulsating sun, forever imprisoned within the palace walls. For 2 centuries, the Amber Room stood silent witness to wars, revolutions, and the fall of entire empires. But its greatest test began in the fateful summer of 1941. German troops steamrollered toward Leningrad, and Tsarskoye Selo found itself directly in the occupiers' path. Soviet museum staff desperately tried to organize the evacuation of the priceless treasure, but time was desperately short. The amber panels proved unbearably fragile. With the first attempts to remove them, they began to crumble and crack. So the curators made a risky decision, disguising the room as an ordinary room, covering the walls with plain paper and rough fabric. But this ruse didn't work. When German officers entered the palace, they immediately saw through the deception. Their eyes were unmistakable, for the Amber Room was born in Prussia. By order of the Wehrmacht command, the masterpiece was dismantled in just a few days. The panels were carefully packed in sturdy crates and shipped to Königsberg. There, they were reassembled in the city castle and, in 1942, even opened for public viewing. Photographs from that era captured it, restored, and as radiant as ever. It seemed that even the horrors of war could not touch this eternal beauty. However, just 2 years later, the room disappeared for a second time, this time forever. In the spring of 1945, as Soviet troops were fighting their way toward Königsberg, the panels were once again removed from the walls and packed away. And there, their trail ends. One theory holds that the amber room burned to the ground in the castle cellars during a massive bombing raid. Another claims it was transported by train deep into Germany. Some claim the treasure was hidden in deep salt mines. Others that it sank with the German ship carrying the looted treasure. Year after year, more and more witnesses emerged. Some claimed to have seen mysterious boxes, others found amber fragments, and some even claimed to have fragments of the panels in their private collections. But not a single tangible piece of evidence was ever found. In the post-war years, the search for the amber room became a veritable obsession. Soviet expeditions combed abandoned mines, secret tunnels, and concrete bunkers. In the 1970s, there was a brief report that some of the panels had been discovered in East Germany, but again, investigations yielded nothing. In the 1980s, there was talk that the amber was hidden beneath Waldsteiner Castle, and in the 1990s, that it had been taken to Kaliningrad and buried somewhere underground. Each time, hope flared brightly, only to fade again. Sometimes, history itself has provided strange, mysterious clues. In 1997, one of the room's original mosaics was discovered in Germany. It had been kept by the son of a soldier who personally participated in the removal of the treasure. This became irrefutable proof that at least some of the panels had survived the war. But where is the rest? This question remains unanswered. Modern researchers adhere to two main theories. The first is tragic. The room truly perished in the inferno of Königsberg Castle. Extreme temperatures could have melted the amber, turning it into a shapeless mass, and forever destroying the great masterpiece. The second version is more romantic. The treasures were taken away on one of the ships that left Prussia in the spring of 1945. Among them was the transport ship Karlsruhe, which sank in the Baltic Sea off the coast of Poland. Recently, underwater archaeologists discovered its wreck, and among the wreckage, noticed fragments of crates very similar to museum containers. Perhaps it is there, in the icy darkness of the sea depths, that the amber room rests, intact, but forever out of reach. In the 2000s, a monumental restoration of the amber room in the Catherine Palace was completed in Russia. Craftsmen labored for nearly 20 years, meticulously restoring every detail, using miraculously preserved drawings and old photographs. The renovated room opened its doors in 2003. And when sunlight streams inside, it seems as if the ancient wonder has come to life again. However, this magnificent replica does not solve the riddle. It merely serves as an eternal reminder of a secret that stubbornly refuses to be revealed. The Amber Room has become more than just a work of art, but a metaphor for lost light, a symbol of how war can destroy not only human lives, but also beauty itself. Every year, archaeologists and treasure hunters return to this story, believing that somewhere, underground or in the depths of the sea, amber still holds the reflection of the candles that once burned in Tsarskoye Selo. And perhaps one day this light will break through the darkness again to remind us that the secrets of the past are alive as long as we continue to search for them. And now let's move to another time and another place, to the very heart of darkness. It's the autumn of 1888. London is engulfed in a thick, milky fog that drifts through the narrow streets of the East End, mingling with the acrid smoke of factory chimneys, the smell of coal smoke, and all-consuming despair. Whitechapel is a pulsating heart of poverty, human filth, and darkness, a place where women are forced to sell their bodies for a crust of stale bread, and impassable mud serves as a backdrop for every crime. It is here, in the middle of a starless night, devoid of light and hope, that the man who will forever change the very concept of horror appears. His name, born on the pages of newspapers, will become a byword, Jack the Ripper. His crimes will become a symbol of the evil that lurks not only in dark alleys, but at the very heart of society. The first victim, Mary Ann Nichols, was found at dawn in late August. 2 deep, fatal cuts gaped in her neck, and her abdomen had been brutally ripped open. Just a week later, the city was shocked by news of a second victim, Annie Chapman. The killer's signature remained unchanged. Terrifying precision, cold, almost surgical calculation, and a profound knowledge of human anatomy. London shuddered with primal terror. Newspapers screamed of a devil in a top hat, a monster silently gliding through the streets at night. Despite endless interrogations and police raids, Scotland Yard was powerless. The criminal acted like a shadow, choosing his victims from among the most defenseless and vanishing into the darkness before anyone could light a gas lamp. At the end of September, a third double attack occurred. That night, police expected another blow, and it came. 2 bodies were discovered almost simultaneously, Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes. With the first victim, the killer seemed to have been unable to complete his grisly deed. Perhaps someone had scared him off. The second was mutilated with such inhuman cruelty that even seasoned detectives could not bear to watch it without shuddering. A cryptic inscription was scrawled in chalk on a nearby wall. Jews are those who will never be accused of anything. It was hastily erased, fearing bloody pogroms. But Jack the Ripper's signature was becoming increasingly clear. He was playing with society, fully aware of his trump card. They feared him, and no one could catch him. The sensation swept the newspapers. Letters signed with the sinister pseudonym Jack the Ripper began arriving at the Central News Agency. The author of these messages openly mocked the police, promised more murders, and described details that only the criminal himself could have known. One of the most terrifying letters, known as the From Hell message, arrived in a package. Inside the envelope was half a human kidney, a terrifying message from the other world. But the main question remained: were these messages genuine, or were they fabricated by some cynical journalist seeking fame? There was no answer. The fifth and final official victim was Mary Jane Kelly, murdered in her own room in November. This crime was the pinnacle of horror. Her body was mutilated beyond recognition, and her internal organs were carefully arranged nearby, as if an invisible priest were performing some sinister, bloody ritual. After this murder, Everything suddenly went quiet. Jack the Ripper disappeared as suddenly as he had appeared. The police questioned hundreds of people. Everyone was under suspicion: doctors, butchers, emigres, sailors. Numerous theories emerged, from a mad barber to the Queen's personal physician, but none were confirmed. The lead investigator on the case, Inspector Aberline, noted in his reports that the perpetrator possessed remarkable anatomical knowledge and acted with icy composure without the slightest sign of panic. This suggested he might have been a doctor, or at least a medical student. Later, a theory emerged about the artist Walter Sickert, who supposedly left hidden hints in his dark paintings. There were even bolder theories about Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's grandson, whom the royal family allegedly tried to hide to avoid a major scandal. Some claimed he was an emigre driven mad by poverty and loneliness. However, all these speculations remained mere conjecture. A century later, the Ripper's name became a symbol not only of a monstrous crime, but also of a profound social malaise. In London of that era, prostitution, alcoholism, and unemployment reached such proportions that neither the police nor the church could cope. Newspapers transformed the nameless killer into the stuff of nightmares, and the entire public into mesmerized spectators, watching the bloody spectacle with horror and secret delight, fed on its own horror. The city's residents waited with bated breath for new news of deaths, as if watching the next act of a chilling play. Each new newspaper issue, with its screaming headline, flew off the shelves in thousands of copies. And on this wave of fear and curiosity, the cult of Jack the Ripper was born. No longer a man of flesh and blood, but an immortal, sinister image. Why has his shadow never faded with time? Perhaps the answer lies in the fact that he became the living embodiment of that primal fear that lurks in the depths of every metropolis, the abyss that yawns beneath the feet of a radiant civilization. His atrocities were more than just a series of brutal reprisals. They were a message that screamed to the world that behind the dazzling facade of Victorian prosperity lurked an impenetrable darkness that no one dared to peer into. Even today, at the beginning of the 21st century, it seemed the veil of secrecy was about to collapse. Modern forensic scientists, armed with DNA analysis technology, set out to solve the mystery. Experts came across a handkerchief allegedly found near the body of one of the unfortunate victims. And lo and behold, in the microscopic fibers of the cloth, they discovered genetic traces that led them to a descendant of the Polish emigre Aaron Kosminski. This barber was already among the prime suspects back then, in the late 19th century. The world waited in anticipation. Would the killer really be named a century later? But the triumph was short-lived. It soon became clear that the samples could have been contaminated by foreign particles, and the analysis itself was far from flawless. Thus, the last hope crumbled to dust, and the mystery plunged back into darkness. And until this contrast between light and shadow fades, the Ripper story will be reborn again and again, taking on new guises. Old London has been transformed beyond recognition. The thick fogs that once shrouded its streets have long since cleared, and the gas lamps have been replaced by bright neon. But even today, in Whitechapel, as dusk falls, groups of people can be seen on a tour, They wander through the very same narrow alleys where the foot of a man once trod, spreading only clammy horror around him. The guide stops by the old brickwork, silently points to the spot where the last tortured body was found, and whispers, "He stood here." And everyone who hears these words feels a chill run down their spine as if time itself has turned back. It seems as if somewhere behind them, Jack's quiet, leisurely footsteps can still be heard. What if Jack the Ripper was never a single person? What if he was just a myth, born of universal fear and urban chaos? But this legend has proven far stronger and more enduring than any truth, even the most terrifying. And as long as cities exist on Earth where dazzling luxury coexists with abject poverty, the echo of his name will live in every dark corner, a quiet, icy whisper, a reminder that evil never goes away. It simply lurks, waiting for the moment when someone turns their back on it again. Let's travel to another era, to a completely different mystery, one that was fervently believed in by powerful czars and simple monks, archaeologists, and ardent revolutionaries alike. This is the legendary library of Ivan the Terrible, a mysterious treasure trove of knowledge sought for centuries but never found. The history of this lost relic dates back to the mid-15th century. It was then that the Moscow Tsar Ivan Vasilievich, known to history as Ivan the Terrible, a ruler whose cruelty was as great as his keen intellect, began to assemble his collection of rare books. Ancient chronicles claim that a significant portion of this collection was inherited from his grandmother, the Byzantine princess Sophia Palaiologina, wife of Ivan III. Legend has it that, fleeing the destruction of Constantinople, she brought with her an entire convoy loaded with chests of priceless ancient manuscripts. These volumes were considered the last surviving fragments of the great Byzantine culture, preserved for centuries within the walls of monasteries and imperial palaces. Ivan the Terrible, having inherited this priceless gift, treated it with an almost paranoid obsession. He immediately ordered the finest minds of his time to translate the ancient texts into Slavic and conceal them forever in a specially created place, a secret underground vault known as Liberia. Even then, the library began to teem with incredible rumors. It was rumored that its walls contained the lost treatises of Aristotle, the original works of Homer, and even books written before the Great Flood. Some were convinced that these manuscripts concealed secret knowledge, granting unlimited power and eternal life. Others whispered that it was a hub of terrible heresies, the mere reading of which could destroy an immortal soul forever. Ivan himself treated his treasure with fanatical care. Access to Liberia was restricted to only a few of the most trusted scribes, and the entrance to the vault was sealed with the Tsar's personal seal. But after Ivan the Terrible's death, all mention of the library suddenly vanished from the chronicles. His son, Fyodor, who ascended the throne, showed no interest in his father's passion. Then the time of troubles, an era of chaos and anarchy, descended upon the country, and all traces of Liberia vanished into the bloody mists of history. Moscow was plundered and burned to the ground, rebuilt many times, and no one could say for sure whether the books had been removed and destroyed or hidden even deeper underground. The first targeted searches began during the reign of Peter the Great. The emperor, passionate about science and education, secretly ordered his archaeologists to thoroughly explore all the Kremlin's underground vaults. The work was conducted in the strictest secrecy, but yielded no results. The explorers stumbled upon ancient underground passages leading to stone-blocked doors, but any attempt to penetrate the barrier ended with the collapse of the ancient vaults, burying the secret even deeper. Since then, every century has produced its own treasure hunters. In the 19th century, archaeologists, monks, and even famous writers all attempted to find the library. People's imaginations conjured up an incredible picture. Somewhere deep underground, in the dank cold of Moscow's cellars, a vast hall lies hidden, where time itself has stood still. Along its walls stretch rows of bookcases filled with ancient tomes. Their parchment pages are cracked with age, but not decayed. Inscribed on them are texts forever erased from world history, manuscripts of the ancient Greeks, Byzantine chronicles, and even scrolls from the legendary Library of Alexandria, which everyone believed had burned to the ground. This myth has haunted Russia for 5 centuries. Even as a child, the future writer Alexander Sumarokov listened breathlessly to stories of underground vaults filled with books where the light never lit. During the Soviet era, beginning in the 1930s, the hunt for Liberia resumed with renewed ideological vigor. Archaeologist Ignatius Stiletsky obtained permission from the authorities to conduct excavations directly beneath the Kremlin walls. He was absolutely certain he had discovered the entrance to an ancient tunnel beneath the Tainitskaya Tower. His team labored for decades, but the sudden outbreak of the Great Patriotic War halted all work. After the war, Stiletsky's own documents mysteriously disappeared, and the excavation site was hastily filled in. This story has been repeated countless times. Indirect evidence exists, but direct proof remains lacking. So, why has this legend proved so persistent? Perhaps it all stems from the personality of the Tsar himself, an extremely controversial figure. Ivan the Terrible was one of the most educated men of his era. He was fluent in Greek and Latin and enjoyed corresponding with European scholars. For him, knowledge was power, to be kept under tight rein. If Liberia truly existed, it could have contained texts that ran counter to church dogma, descriptions of ancient civilizations, precise maps of uncharted lands, and secret treatises on alchemy. For medieval Rus, such books would have posed a mortal danger. Modern historians are trying to separate fact from fiction. The Vatican archives do contain references to valuable manuscripts being sent to Moscow during the reign of Sophia Paleologina. Moreover, some 15th century sources directly refer to the library as a top state secret. Letters from foreigners fortunate enough to visit Ivan the Terrible's court contain descriptions of a room filled with Greek and Latin books in precious, gold-embellished bindings. However, not a single piece of material evidence, not a scrap of parchment, not a fragment of a book cover has ever been found. Sometimes discoveries are made that inspire new hope. In the 20th century, during restoration work on the Kremlin grounds, builders discovered walled-up niches and tunnels extending deep underground. One of the workers later swore that he glimpsed inside for a moment and saw a vaulted hall filled with some sort of crates. But the passage was immediately sealed by order from above. Archaeologists are confident Moscow's underground levels remain virtually unexplored. Some are buried, others lie beneath the foundations of modern buildings. And who knows, perhaps somewhere there, in the darkness and centuries of dust, lie books touched by the hands of Byzantine monks and royal scribes. Another version holds that the library was destroyed on orders from Ivan the Terrible himself. Before his death, he allegedly feared that the priceless knowledge would fall into the hands of his enemies or those with impure intentions. One chronicle claims that the Tsar ordered the chests of books buried in a dungeon beneath St. Basil's Cathedral, and the entrance to the hiding place filled with molten lead. This story reads more like a beautiful legend, but it is precisely such tales which blend fear and faith in miracles that can endure entire eras. Today, the search for Liberia continues. Scholars study ancient plans of the Kremlin, analyze ancient letters, and compare maps from different centuries. But the deeper they dig, the more insurmountable this mystery seems. However, even if the library is never found, it will forever remain in our memories, in books, and in our imaginations. Ivan the Terrible's library has become a metaphor for history itself, demonstrating how great knowledge can be simultaneously saved and irretrievably lost. Some see it as a symbol of enlightenment, others as the secret of absolute power. Perhaps it never existed in reality, but the very idea of such greatness, imprisoned underground, has become a reflection of the eternal human dream of knowledge, simply awaiting its time. And perhaps, somewhere there, beneath the echoing vaults of Moscow, there really is a hall filled with ringing silence. Under a layer of centuries-old dust, sleep books written by people whose names have long since faded from memory. And if one day they are found, they will change not only our understanding of history, but also our very understanding of power. The power of words, which has outlived both czars and entire empires. Picture this day, November 22nd, 1963. Dallas, Texas, is bathed in a bright, warm sun. The sky is flawless, a gentle breeze barely flutters the flags, and the streets are packed with people with smiles on their faces. President John Fitzgerald Kennedy, accompanied by his wife Jacqueline and Texas Governor John Connally, rides in an open limousine, greeting the crowds. It was a typical campaign tour, and the air was thick with a sense of celebration and confidence, as if a new bright era were about to begin. And suddenly, a sharp, deafening bang, then a second, a third. In that second, the world froze. America had lost more than just its leader. It had lost faith that the truth could be simple and clear. Kennedy was fatally wounded in the head. The governor was seriously wounded in the chest. The car, tires screeching, sped toward the nearest hospital, but doctors could only pronounce the president dead. Just minutes later, news of the tragedy spread across radio stations, and a deafening, mournful silence descended on the streets of American cities. Millions of people simply refused to believe that the young, charming leader, whose smile had become the symbol of an entire generation, was no longer alive. People wept, glued to their television screens, and almost immediately, along with the wave of shock, the main question arose: who fired the shots? Just an hour after the assassination attempt, police captured a man named Lee Harvey Oswald. A former Marine, he had defected and lived for several years in the Soviet Union. Oswald was captured at a movie theater. He was unarmed, looked confused, but remained surprisingly calm. In his apartment, investigators found the rifle, the very same Mannlicher Carcano rifle, and his fingerprints on it. Picture this. Early winter 1948, Somerton Beach, Australia, near Adelaide. With the first rays of sun, local fishermen come ashore. A solitary figure near a stone wall catches their attention. The man, dressed in an impeccable suit and polished shoes, sits seemingly lost in thought, his gaze fixed on the horizon. But time passes, the sun rises higher, and he doesn't move. And then a terrible realization dawns. He's dead. His posture was perfectly calm, his hands folded peacefully, his face showing no sign of agony or suffering. The police who arrived at the scene were baffled. There were no signs of a struggle, not a drop of blood. But the strangest thing was yet to come. The dead man had no identification. Moreover, all the tags and labels on his clothing had been carefully cut away, as if someone had deliberately wanted to erase any clues to his identity. Thus was born one of the most perplexing and macabre mysteries of the 20th century, the case known as Tamam Shud. Only a few mundane items were found in the pockets of this nameless ghost: a cheap comb, an unused bus ticket, a pack of gum, and cigarettes. But among them was one item that would transform this case into legend: a tiny scrap of paper with just 2 words printed on it: Tamam Shud. Translated from Persian, this means completed or ended. It became clear that this scrap had been torn from a book. These words didn't just pose questions. They created a chilling sense that this death was no accident, but rather the final act in a carefully orchestrated play. Pathologists examining the body encountered new oddities. In the stomach, they found traces of a rare poison, tasteless, odorless, and virtually undetectable by standard tests. This poison causes instant respiratory paralysis, but leaves the victim's face a mask of absolute calm. Given the perfect condition of the body and the absence of external injuries, the suicide theory seemed logical. However, it didn't answer the main question: where was the poison itself? No ampule, syringe, or traces of any food with which it could have been ingested were found. The identity of the deceased remained a mystery. Forensic experts, having studied his physique, concluded that the man was no more than 45 years old and in excellent physical condition. He had well-groomed hands, unused to heavy labor, but incredibly developed calf muscles, the kind you'd find in professional dancers or soldiers accustomed to drill. He could have been anyone: a scout, an athlete, a spy. His boots were immaculately clean but noticeably worn, suggesting long marches. However, no police or military database either in Australia or abroad was able to identify him. A few days later, a suitcase was discovered in a storage locker at the local train station. It turned out to have been abandoned shortly before the man's death. Everything inside was meticulously arranged: clothes, shaving kit, and again, not a single tag, not a single label. Among the items were 11 buttons, a spool of rare thread not produced in Australia, and another scrap of paper, the font on which exactly matched the one found in the deceased's pocket. This clue led the investigation to Omar Khayyam's Rubaiyat, a collection of Persian philosophical poems. An identical copy of the book was found in a local resident's car. The man had no idea how it got there. When the book was opened, everything fell into place. the last page had been torn out. It was from this page that the fragment with the inscription Tamam Shud had been cut out. But that wasn't all. A strange set of letters and symbols resembling an unbreakable cipher was scrawled in pencil in the margins of the book. The best cryptographers in the Army and intelligence agencies struggled with it, but were unable to crack it. The mystery deepened. The only real lead was a young nurse named Jessica Thompson, who lived near where the body was found. When investigators showed her a plaster cast of the dead man's face, she reportedly turned deathly pale and was on the verge of fainting. However, upon regaining consciousness, she firmly claimed she had never seen the man. Meanwhile, the very same collection of Omar Khayyam's poems was found in her home, and on the back was a phone number linked to her address. For the rest of her life, Jessica steadfastly denied any connection to the case and avoided any discussion of it. A theory arose that the man from Somerton Beach could have been a Soviet spy. In the post-war years, Australia became a veritable arena for secret intelligence games. The elusive poison, the complete lack of documents, and the iron restraint, all this pointed to a top-notch professional. But why would he need a message from a Persian poet whose poems speak of the transience of existence and the acceptance of one's fate? Perhaps it was a signal that the mission had been completed, or that it had failed. There's also a more romantic theory. The unknown man may have been unrequitedly in love with Jessica Thompson, and his death was a final, desperate act after she rejected him. Soon after, the woman gave birth to a son who was found to have a rare genetic ear abnormality, exactly the same as the one found on the beach. Geneticists speculated that they might have been father and son, but at the time, it was impossible to prove. The body remained buried, unmarked. A simple plaque was placed on his grave with the inscription, "Here lies the unknown man found on Somerton Beach." Since then, the site has become a magnet for researchers and journalists from around the world. Each of them, standing at the modest headstone, asks the same question: who was he, and what happened to him? There is no answer, and perhaps there never will be. And while the world continues to speculate, the mystery of the man who came to the ocean shore to die lives on, reminding us that history contains mysteries destined to be solved. Let's travel back in time to that very hill, a place of pilgrimage for minds from around the world. The finest cryptographers, meticulous historians, and even science fiction authors, they all came here to try to unravel this unsolved mystery. And then, in 2017, science finally got a chance to peer beyond the veil of time. Scientists were granted permission to exhume the mysterious body. Modern technology made it possible to achieve the near impossible, extracting surviving DNA from a strand of hair that had lain in the ground for decades. After years of painstaking comparisons and complex genetic analysis, in 2022 the world heard a name: Carl Webb, a simple engineer from Melbourne who disappeared without a trace in the late 1940s. It would seem the mystery was solved. But no, this discovery only gave rise to new, even deeper questions. Why did this man end up in a completely different city, hiding under an assumed name? Why did he choose a poison so rare that the best experts of the time couldn't identify it? And perhaps most disturbing, Why was there not a single sign of a struggle on his body, as if he had voluntarily accepted his fate? The phrase Tamam Shud has forever become a symbol of this chilling story. These words sound like a finale, like the last point in a novel written by a man who decided to leave the world without any explanation. But what if this is not the end of the narrative, but a coded key, a message that no one has ever been able to decipher? Every new attempt to shed light on this mystery only deepens the shadows around it. Today, the Somerton Beach case is no longer just a criminal puzzle. It's a true parable about the incomprehensibility of the human soul, about how even in our age of total control and high technology, mysteries remain that defy both science and the most rigorous logic. To this day, the waves of Somerton Beach wash ashore tiny shell fragments, among which, sometimes like a mocking glimmer, a shard of amber glass glitters, a silent reminder of a man whose end was captured in just 2 words that have become an eternal mystery. Now, let's travel to the sands of Egypt, where the story of Tutankhamun's curse awaits. Just a few months after the tomb was opened, chilling events began to unfold. The first victim was Lord Carnarvon himself, the expedition's sponsor. He was bitten by a common mosquito. But the tiny wound became infected, blood poisoning set in, and the aristocrat died in agony. That very night, as newspaper headlines screamed, the lights inexplicably went out throughout Cairo, and his faithful dog, thousands of miles away in England, suddenly howled loudly and instantly fell dead. This event sparked a conflagration of widespread panic, and although dry statistics would later show that most of the participants in those excavations lived long and happy lives, the chain of tragedies was unstoppable. Soon, the expedition's secretary died, followed by the team member who had first opened the sarcophagus. One of the project's financiers died under extremely mysterious circumstances in Paris, and another prominent archaeologist suddenly fell ill and died just a year later. Newspapers vied with each other to trumpet stories of the pharaoh's terrifying vengeance, of guardian spirits protecting the peace of dead kings. And so, a new ominous phrase thundered across the world: the mummy's curse. It was said that a clay tablet was found among the tomb's treasures, with the inscription carved on it: "Death on swift wings will befall anyone who disturbs the king's peace." And although the excavation's director, Howard Carter, vehemently denied the tablet's existence, the myth could no longer be stopped. It had taken on a life of its own. The public's imagination conjured up a picture of the ancient gods unleashing their wrath on mortals who dared to trespass into the realms of eternity. Scientists, of course, tried to find a rational explanation for these strange deaths. Some suggested that the spores of a toxic mold, dormant in the tomb for thousands of years, could have been to blame. Others spoke of ancient fungi secreting deadly toxins. Still others simply claimed it was a chain of tragic coincidences, as many people had participated in the expedition, and over the years, some of them were bound to die of natural causes. But the myth of an ancient curse proved stronger than any logic. In life, Tutankhamun was not a great ruler. He ascended the throne as a mere child and reigned only briefly, dying at the age of about 19. However, his death transformed him into an immortal symbol. His tomb, the only one found in the Valley of the Kings that has survived largely unplundered, became a living testimony to the power of their ancient gods for the Egyptians, and for Europeans, a threatening reminder of the boundaries that should never be crossed. Over time, the fascination with the curse became a true cultural phenomenon. Books were written about it, films were made, and radio broadcasts were broadcast. People who worked with Egyptian artifacts in one way or another actually complained of sudden migraines, unexplained fainting spells, and disturbing, vivid dreams. Psychologists attributed this to the power of autosuggestion. But can it really erase the chilling feeling that ancient texts sometimes speak to us seriously? In the mid-20th century, as Tutankhamun's mummy was being prepared for exhibition in London, the curse seemed to reawaken. One museum employee died suddenly of a stroke, and another collapsed while the sarcophagus was being installed. The tabloid press immediately exploded with new headlines, reviving the old legend. Carter's own notes mentioned secret passages which he never dared explore for fear of damaging the tomb walls. Who knows? Perhaps it was there, in the darkness, that the very texts warning against disturbing the pharaoh's peace were hidden. Some Egyptologists believe the curse is not a threat, but a kind of defense mechanism created by priests to maintain ritual order. The ancients believed that any touching of the tomb upset the delicate balance between the world of the living and the world of the dead. Tutankhamun has become an eternal symbol of ancient Egypt. His golden funerary mask is an emblem of eternity, a cold gaze from the depths of the past that seems to watch unwaveringly all who dare to peer into its mystery. Perhaps this is the true power of the curse, not physical destruction, but an eternal invisible presence. It reminds us that everything created by human hands will sooner or later return to dust. But that which is created by faith lives forever. And today, in the halls of the Cairo Museum, thousands of tourists pause before the display case containing the young king's sarcophagus. They see a face frozen in eternal peace and convince themselves that it is merely a beautiful story. However, each of them feels a slight chill on their skin, as if the air around them is becoming denser than it should be. This very breath of time makes it clear that the mystery has not disappeared. The curse of Tutankhamun is not a story about death, but about the hubris of a man who imagined he could seize eternity. And that's why it still lives. We continue to gaze at the ancient king's gold, seeking a reflection of ourselves in it, and forget that eternity abhors touch. But there are other stories where eternity was stolen in broad daylight. Imagine Isabella Stewart Gardner's vast estate transformed into a unique museum. On the spring morning of March 18, 1990, absolute silence reigned. The chill March air still hung heavy on the streets of Boston. Late in the night, while the entire city slept, a car pulled up to the museum gates, and two men in police uniforms approached the door. They rang the bell and introduced themselves as officers responding to an emergency call. The security guards on duty that night made a fatal mistake. Disregarding all instructions, they let them inside. Just minutes later, security cameras captured the final scene. The guards were already bound and locked in the basement. The strangers were left alone in a building whose walls hung priceless paintings by Vermeer, Rembrandt, Degas, and Manet. In 81 minutes, while the city slept, The museum lost 15 masterpieces worth over $500 million. This crime has forever gone down in history as the largest and most audacious art theft ever. When employees arrived for work in the morning, they were met with chaos. Empty frames gaped on the walls, resembling the gruesome marks of amputation. Rembrandt's legendary painting, Christ in the Storm on the Sea of Galilee, had been brutally cut from its frame with a knife. The investigation began immediately. Police questioned everyone, employees, neighbors, and renowned collectors. Suspicion fell on everyone, from petty local thieves to international mafia syndicates, but all the evidence seemed to vanish into thin air. The internal security systems were hopelessly outdated. No one could figure out how the criminals had fled the city without leaving a trace. There were no fingerprints, and the cameras captured only vague silhouettes in the darkness. The Federal Bureau of Investigation offered a reward, initially at $1 million, then it increased to $5 million, and soon reached an incredible $10 million. Reward notices were posted all over the world, but time passed, and not a single stolen work surfaced on the black market or at auction. Usually, such art is eventually recovered, as it cannot be kept secret forever. But here, a deathly silence reigned, as if the paintings had simply vanished. Over the years, many theories have emerged about the fate of the stolen items. One theory claimed the theft was carried out by the Italian mafia, who used the masterpieces as collateral for drug and arms deals. Another held that it was the cunning plan of an eccentric collector who dreamed of creating his own secret museum, hidden from the world. Some claimed the crime was commissioned by a wealthy connoisseur who desired the privacy of masterpieces whose existence in his collection no one would have suspected. The cold, calculating precision of the robbers' actions only reinforced this theory. They clearly targeted specific items, knowing exactly what to take and what could be left behind. One of the most intriguing theories was a connection to a Boston crime syndicate, which included legendary gangster James Whitey Bulger. He, of course, denied any involvement, but once said he knew full well who was behind the robbery. However, no evidence was ever found. People who could have shed light on the story either died one after another from a bullet, succumbed to illness, or simply vanished without a trace. Nevertheless, hope for solving the case would occasionally flare up. In the early 2000s, an informant claimed that some of the paintings were hidden in the basement of an old house in Connecticut, but the FBI's brilliantly planned operation failed. The basement was empty. Later, another source spoke of a hiding place in Ireland, where the paintings were allegedly taken after a deal with European criminals. But even there, the agents were disappointed. But the most mysterious aspect of this story is the very choice of stolen works. Of the stolen works, at least 7 had no significant market value. Why were they taken, leaving other, far more priceless canvases on the walls? Perhaps the thieves were acting on a specific, yet strange, order. Or perhaps they simply made a mistake in the dark, unable to distinguish the originals from the copies. Or perhaps it was all just a diversionary tactic, a grand smokescreen, designed to snatch from the museum just one, but the most important item, the true treasure for which the entire operation was intended. But what was that item, and where is it now? This mystery remains unsolved. The precise purpose of this ancient cataclysm remains a profound mystery. The Great Permian extinction was more than just a natural disaster. It's a story about the fragility of life and how an entire world can become hostage to the blind force of the planet. It reminded the universe that even the most powerful ecosystem can vanish in a single geological instant if a force of nature decides its time has come to an end. Paleontologists still haven't closed the case, and the ultimate reward, understanding the causes, still awaits its time. Scientists periodically release new hypotheses. We know it was related to volcanism, but we don't have all the details. This means that somewhere, perhaps deep within ancient rocks, in fossil layers or in the chemical composition of the rocks, lies the key to the mystery. Today, geologists see empty layers in rock sections, reminiscent of scars that have not healed over millions of years. They study these dead horizons where life once teemed, feeling how their absence becomes more real than any presence. Nature itself left these blank pages in its annals, and this has become a symbol, an eternal reminder of a colossal loss. Each new discovery in ancient sediments, be it spores of extinct plants or isotopic anomalies, brings hope, but then is once again drowned in scientific reports and debates. Scientists have calculated that if all the species that disappeared then existed today, the planet's biodiversity would be 10 times richer. For now, these empty ecological niches, gaping wounds on the planet's body, remind us that part of the soul of the ancient world is still trapped, somewhere in the darkness of the geological past. The whispers of time repeat only one thing: secrets await discovery. Winter at the end of the Cretaceous, at the edge of the world, was merciless. An icy wind roared like a hungry predator. The frozen ground cracked beneath massive feet, and the low polar sun, barely visible above the horizon, shone dimly as if peering through thick, murky ice. The old leader, Procurinosaurus, and the remnants of his herd stood on a vast, snow-white plain where there was no sound, no grass, no escape. Before them stretched a frozen mountain range, an impassable wall. And so they realized they were too late. Winter had arrived before they could reach the saving southern valleys. Their great quest for survival had turned into tragedy, and their path back was cut off. This story, written in stone, still evokes shivers. The leader was an experienced male, an animal whose life was built on instinct, discipline, and the honor of the herd. His sole goal was to guide his fellow herd members to warmer lands where the young could survive the harsh polar night. At the beginning of autumn, he led his herd south. His rear guard consisted of the strongest males, experts in their field, protectors. Nature itself and millions of years of evolution had prepared them for this journey, emphasizing endurance and willpower over panicked flight. The leader relied not on speed, but on the invincible strength and unity of the herd. However, in the face of an unusually early and harsh winter, this choice proved fatal. The journey south took weeks, and the cold already reached 40 degrees below zero. The weak and young perished one after another, leaving the strong to forge a path through the snow, expending their last strength. When they finally reached the foothills that would become the gateway to salvation, their faces were frozen in silent despair. In the gorge left by the glacier, only the wind howled, a harbinger of defeat. Victory had slipped away, leaving only one path to eternity. Their fossilized remains, discovered millions of years later, stand as a testament to incredible courage. They seem to tell us of snow that fell for days, of wind that pierced to the bone, and of comrades who grew weaker with each passing day. The first to fall was a young male, separated from the herd and injured in a fall. His death was quiet and unnoticed. He was followed by an older bull, suffering from frostbite and starvation. One night, he simply wandered away from the sleeping herd and walked into a snowstorm to avoid being a burden. He was never seen again. The others continued on their way until only 3 remained: the leader, a female, and her calf. They reached a frozen riverbed hoping to find shelter, but the snowstorm finally overwhelmed them. The last traces they left end here. It seems this is the end. They held on to the last, for the future of their species, for the continuation of their lineage. When a paleontological expedition discovered them 66 million years later, their bones lay nearby, covered by layers of rock, as if they had simply fallen asleep. However, the mystery of this herd's demise remains unsolved. Why did such an experienced leader miscalculate the timing? Why didn't he turn back sooner? Some believe he was betrayed by the spirit of his ancestors, his innate stubbornness, and his belief that the herd could overcome any element through sheer force and willpower. Others argue that climate conditions played a decisive role. After all, geological records indicate that winter that year was the harshest in millennia. Later, in the 21st century, traces of a warmer valley covered in conifers were discovered just a few kilometers from the site of their death. Had they reached it, they might have survived. But the storm lasted for over a week, making it impossible to escape the icy captivity. Their deaths became a symbol not of defeat, but of the limits of survival. When the bones were recovered, the world learned of their heroic struggle. The demise of the Pachyrhinosaurus herd is more than just a tale of a failed migration. It's a tale of the limits of the animal spirit. It's a story of how instinct, faith in a leader, and delusion intertwine into a single line leading into the permafrost. Buried under tons of rock, the leader and his companions became a true legend. Their bones are on display in museums, and the story of their final journey has been told throughout the world. It reads not like a dry scientific report, but like a testament. Life is worth fighting for until the last breath. Over time, debate about this event has continued. Recently, researchers have conducted new analyses of the bones and concluded that the cause of death could have been not only hypothermia, but also exhaustion due to a lack of trace elements in the sparse polar vegetation. Perhaps the leader knew his end was near and simply stayed with his family, preferring to meet it with dignity. However, this cannot be proven. Today, a memorial sign stands at the site of the discovery in the harsh Arctic tundra. Engraved on it are the words, "Fight, seek, find, and never give up." This sign stands where the creatures froze to the end, perhaps already realizing they would not return. Their Latin name has become immortal. And where the wind still sings over the permafrost, it seems as if it carries the leader's final thoughts. We did all we could. The legend of the Sunstone originated in the early 20th century. At that time, the flames of the bone wars between paleontologists had yet to cool. rumors began to spread throughout Europe and America about an incredible relic that an unknown prospector had managed to hide from renowned scientists. This object was called the amber sarcophagus, believed to contain the light of the prehistoric sun and the secret of evolution. The stone was described as being crafted from a gigantic piece of golden amber, and within it, according to legend, a creature resembling a feathered lizard was frozen. Its surface bore strange patterns understandable only to the initiated. This artifact was believed to hold the key to the greatest discoveries, but in the hands of the ignorant, it would turn into a useless stone, or even bring misfortune. Wherever rumors about him arose, they were invariably followed by mysterious disappearances and abrupt expeditions. The first mentions of the stone appeared shortly after the great paleontological discoveries in Bavaria, when the first Archaeopteryx specimens were found. However, the list of finds seemed suspiciously incomplete to some enthusiasts. The fossils contained nothing that could serve as an irrefutable transitional link. Historians of science believe that in the chaos of the excavations, some of the finds may have been lost or stolen, taking with them something more precious than gold. According to one theory, the find ended up in China. According to another, it ended up in a private collection in England, where its traces were lost. There, among the old mansions, whispers began to circulate about a golden stone that glows in the dark when light is directed at the right angle. Early 20th century travelers wrote of a similar stone they allegedly saw in northern Spain, in an old monastery where strange glows were observed in the library at night. Local monks believed it was a reflection of divine truth. However, the monastery was soon damaged by fire, and among the ruins, only a melted piece of resin similar to amber was found. People believed the relic had vanished into oblivion. Later, during a time of great political upheaval in Europe, the stone resurfaced. Some sought it as a symbol of ancient Aryan wisdom, others as proof of their scientific theories. The archives of the Third Reich contain reports that the amber artifact was found somewhere in East Prussia and transported to a secret storage facility. However, the train carrying it was soon destroyed in a bombing raid. Legend has it that an eyewitness reported seeing an unearthly golden glow emanate from one of the burning crates as it sank into the ground. The story of the stone that glowed from within resurfaced in South America in the 1950s. A strange prospector showed it to a university representative, claiming it belonged to the descendants of ancient civilizations. The scientist ordered it hidden in a safe. However, 2 days later, the prospector was found dead, and the stone disappeared. Modern researchers have repeatedly attempted to confirm the existence of this relic. Dozens of amber specimens with inclusions can be found in museums, but none have been found to possess the described properties. However, some old diaries mention that the actual stone was special. Interestingly, inside it, next to the frozen creature, there was supposedly a tiny air bubble with words engraved on its wall by nature, a pattern similar to the Latin in Lux Veritas, which translates as "in the light is truth." There's a theory that the amber sarcophagus wasn't a material object at all. Perhaps it symbolized secret knowledge, the revolutionary idea that birds descended from dinosaurs. knowledge that scientists guarded and passed on orally, fearing ridicule.